across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good afternoon. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell with you until 7 o'clock, and it's going to be a very busy 3 hours because what's happening? Well, Keir Starmer is going to be at the White House very, very soon for an incredibly important meeting, arguably one of the most important meetings of his time as Prime Minister, with Donald Trump, the US President. And the question is, what will he get out of it? Because his view on Ukraine and what should happen there is very, very different from that of Donald Trump. We'll see if anything concrete comes from it. We'll be live at the White House with Harry Coole. He's the political editor of The Sun and is going through security as we speak. He'll be speaking to us in about 20 minutes' time. We'll hear from the press conference a bit later on, probably during Kevin's programme, and other bits of detail, the meeting that Donald Trump and Keir Starmer will have. There'll be all sorts of pictures and detail coming out of that, as well as analysis. This is the place you want to be to find out what's going to happen in British and American politics, and indeed around the world. The EU has a role, Ukraine has a role. There's lots to discuss. We're also going to be discussing today a scandal at the BBC. There are 500 members of the media who are saying that they should put the Gaza documentary back on the iPlayer. Well, should that happen? What do you think? 0344 499 1000. If you're watching Jeremy Kyle yesterday around 4:20, you'll know my view on it, and it's not that it should go back on the iPlayer. Lots of we'll talk to the Shadow Culture Secretary as well about that, and about what Gary Lineker has said. Should big ears just be quiet? Also, every driver's personal information to be available to the police. Is that something you welcome, or is it Big Brother gone mad? We'll also talk about 500,000 benefit claimants who are out of work because they're sick and have never had a job. As always, I want to get the experts' view on. We've got one in the studio in just a second, Simon Diggins, Colonel Simon Diggins, but I want your views too. This is my show, but it's your show too. 0344 499 1000 is the main number. You know that I love having as many people on the air as possible, as many perspectives. If you think I'm wrong, you lift the phone and you tell me. 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. The main number does three things. You can send me a voice note, less than a minute please. You can send me a WhatsApp text message, or you can give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Let's get started. So much to talk about this Thursday evening here on Talk. Well, I'm delighted my first guest is Colonel Simon Diggins. He's a military and defence analyst. It's great to see you in the flesh. We haven't actually had the pleasure before. We've spoken to each other many, many times. Really, really interesting day. And I think there's a few things I'd quite like you to kind of explain to us. This whole idea of a backstop, the Prime Minister talking about a considered decision to deploy troops to Ukraine alongside soldiers from France and other European nations, provided there is a backstop from the United States. What would that actually mean in practice, do you think?
I think what it means is two things. One is that some of the real sort of backstop logistics, intelligence, cyber information to continue from the United States. We rely very heavily, particularly UK, on our access to Five Eyes material, which the Americans produce.
That's the intelligence alliance,
that's intelligence stuff, but it's also other things around kind of cyber information. There's a whole kind of infrastructure that gives us the information to be able to do our job. But the second thing they're after is something a little more concrete, which they're talking about potentially American air support in the event there's a significant problem if our own Air Force and our own troops on the ground were unable to cope. So understanding that the Americans would back us up in that particular instance.
But we're not talking about American troops on the ground.
No, I think that seems to be out of the question. And I mean, there's clearly an argument also about European troops. And indeed, one of the Putin's lines is he will not accept NATO members of Europe there, which would, at least in theory, exclude both us and the French.
But I suppose the question is, are they forces acting in a NATO capacity, or are they in a national capacity? Because if it's just British and French troops or a few other nations, that's not specifically a NATO force, is it?
No, and there's many models in the past where the same forces who are also members of NATO are employed in groupings, they call them coalitions of the willing, where they may use NATO procedures, but they're definitely not NATO, and that's normal for them. Now the Russians.
Where is that in Iraq, presumably?
Iraq was one. Most recently, I saw in Djibouti we had a of European force there, which had British soldiers, airmen embedded in it, but it operated using some NATO procedures, because NATO is probably the most, if you like, most effective worked-up military alliance in the world, but it was definitely not a NATO operation. And the Russians will claim it is, but it really isn't. It's not NATO command and control. It's not using NATO infrastructures. It just happens to be people who are actually part of NATO as well.
But how much does the Russian perception matter within this? It may legally, specifically, not be a NATO force, but if they essentially declare that it is, which appears to be where Putin's going with this, what effect does that then have?
It raises the stakes. I have to be honest with you. That's a straightforward answer for that, and it's going to be a constant source of tension for them. So I think one of the key things would be to, as far as the overall settlement would be, is try and find a way to give Putin at least something of what he wants. Now, we shouldn't underestimate this. He's looking for a ceasefire as well. I mean, whilst on the battlefield, Russia has an area of some superiority over what the Ukraine's able to do, just simply the sheer numbers. The effect on his economy, the strain, the effect of nearly 800,000 plus casualties, over 100,000 killed. That is something that he's very, very conscious of. And he's been told by his central bankers, because the thing was leaked, that he's probably got another year max to be able to do what he's doing. Otherwise, the effect on the economy is going to be disastrous.
It's been interesting as well, speaking about not just NATO membership, but EU membership as well, when we're thinking about various countries in regard to this. We have Juncker, for example, who said that he doesn't think the Ukraine should be given EU membership because of its economy and so on. I just wonder what you make of that slight resistance from some people to actually Ukraine joining these supranational international bodies.
Yeah, and I think there's a long path. I mean, the path to EU membership is long and very difficult. But with other countries, for example, like Bulgaria and Romania, which had not dissimilar sorts of levels of economy to Ukraine, were able to join the European Union. So there's no good reason why, if you like, in terms of the technical facts on the ground, they couldn't mean it. It's really a question of what the implication means in terms for the European Union to be there. But I think there's a sense that if they're not going to be allowed to join NATO, and that does also seem to be something which most people seem to be accepting, then giving them a role and, if you like, a direction of travel in terms of joining the European Union would be regarded as a strong and positive alternative, not least of which because it's going to be very helpful in terms of the reconstruction of Ukraine, which is going to be necessary after 3 years of pretty devastating war and massive hits on their infrastructure.
I wonder if I can ask you about this minerals deal a little bit, because it's really interesting when you talk about security guarantees. If there is a deal and it is signed and you have the United States essentially dependent on Ukraine to deliver, probably over a longish period of time, $500 billion of mineral money, surely that in itself almost sort of bakes in a security guarantee, because I just wonder about this phrase security guarantees and what they actually mean, because from the American perspective, they want the money and they want to make sure that that can happen and that Ukraine is a sovereign nation that can deliver that.
No, I think that's right. And I think it's that wider definition of security, which is wider than just simply military prowess and equipment and resources, I think is important. I mean, what do people want at the end of the day? We're not going to get Ukraine, its borders back into 2014. That's just not going to happen in the immediate future. What you're looking for a Ukraine that's prosperous, that's sustainable, that can look after itself. And security in that sense is its economic security. And this is the timelines for this mineral deal look to be long term, which suggests there's a sense of US engagement over the long term in the long term prosperity and security of Ukraine. So it seems very transactional. I think we find that as slightly difficult to deal with. But there is, as you say, a kind of a quid pro quo in terms of we're here for the long term.
Both on the minerals and indeed the peace negotiations that have been happening between the US and Russia in Istanbul today. I wonder, are you surprised at the pace of this?
Not necessarily. I think because first of all, the fact there need to be some kind of deal, I think it's been obvious to most people, certainly since last summer, and the sense that both sides had kind of slugged it out. Last summer, the Ukrainians conducted the Kursk offensive, which has taken them a little bit into Russian territory, but they couldn't exploit it very much. And there's been a steady erosion, steady pace of taking of territory, not very much territory by the Russians, but it's quite clear that neither really have at the moment the ability to deliver knockout punch against each other. So they're like two heavyweight boxers kind of slugging it out from there. So the fact there's been some requirement for a kind of ceasefire deal since at least last summer, I think it's been obvious. Trump, right from the beginning of his election campaign, talked about first he said that there would have been no war if he'd been the president, but he's also talked about having peace in 24 hours, and we've known that from there. So, whilst people have kind of ignored that, quietly in the background, a lot of conversations have been taking place. So, the pace is not the 24 hours that he boasted of, but nonetheless, it's in line with what he said is going to happen.
It's quick.
Oh, it certainly is, yes.
Yeah. Tell me, Simon, your thoughts in regard to the Chagos Islands, because Stramer, there are various headlines set to blow defence billions on a Chagos surrender. There are questions about what Kemi Badenoch was saying yesterday. There is some suggestion, well, certainly, I watched Prime Minister's questions, and Keir Starmer could have said, no, the defence money is not going to the Chagos Islands. That would have been a very, very clear answer. Instead, he went into the lawyer mode and didn't give a clear answer. I just wonder, in regard to Trump and the conversations that are going to happen today, how big a deal is it going to be as a discussion point, especially as David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary and Celebrity Mastermind contestant, has told us that Donald Trump has a veto on the UK's plan to give up sovereignty of the Chagos Islands.
There's no question about it. The US think what Starmer and Lammy announced is complete nonsense. They are happy with what they're doing in there. They want it to remain a British territory. They're very worried about some of Mauritius's links with China, and they worry that the Mauritians would go back on any deal that the British have made. They're comfortable with the British having sovereign power over that territory, and there's no reason whatsoever. There's actually no reason in law why we need to hand that territory to Mauritius. So it's a very poor deal. But the suggestion, and you're quite right, he could easily yesterday at Prime Minister's Question Times have knocked that whole thing on the head, and he chose not to, which does rather suggest that even though he's boasted about increasing defence expenditure by sort of another sort of another percentage up to 2.5%, that actually some of the increase, and it's 13 billion over 2 years. It's not a massive amount of money. He thinks some of that money can go towards paying for the Chagos deals. That's not going to give us what we need. Soldiers on the ground, tanks, aircraft, and ships are actually at sea.
Maybe you can answer this question, Simon, which we get frequently enough, actually, on this channel, which is, if our government is desperate to get rid of the Chagos Islands, why doesn't Starmer just give them to America?
There's absolutely no reason why they couldn't do that. People do swap territories. The US Virgin Islands were originally Dutch Virgin Islands. Hawaii was originally a British possession, and we sold it on to the Americans in the 1850s. There's no good reason why they shouldn't do that. The only thing I'd say, and I hope we all agree this, is you look after the people of the Dia Garcin. I think we all recognise that. But there's absolutely no reason at all why they couldn't do it. The only reason we're holding it essentially is potentially as effectively an aircraft carrier for the US. So there's no good reason why we shouldn't do so.
What else do you think will be discussed today? We've got, Ukraine is such a huge area, Putin and so on. Chagos Islands will perhaps come up in some way. What else do you think is worth talking about, certainly from your perspective as a military and defence analyst, Simon?
I think what does the Americans mean? What are they trying to do with what Peter Hegseth has talked about, which is actually reducing their defence expenditure? Why is he doing that? Is it just because he just sees the US Department of Defence as massively bloated and needing to cut back? Or does it indicate a different approach to security? Now, one of the things that's said about the Americans, and particularly under Trump, is they've got this America First policy, which has a background of American isolationism. Is this actually a move towards America basically pulling its horns in, not just in Europe, which we're now getting used to the idea of that, but actually around the world? So, he's talking about, quite big amounts. So he was talking about 8% per annum over 5 years. That's a 40% cut. Now that's massive. They've got their budget is nearly $1 trillion a year. Even a $600 billion budget is massive by our standards. But that 40%, if it was delivered, would be a significant change in the way in which Americans do business. So what's that all about as well? I think we're not sure about on the defence and security side. And then there's the whole issue. You talked about security in the wider sense around the economy. Why the issue around tariffs? What does the effect of tariff mean on terms of economic security for the countries who would like to be most affected?
He's talked about Trump has talked about 25% tariffs on the EU. Could the UK be next, or could we be exempted? That's a whole other massive topic. Colonel Simon Diggins, thank you so much for joining me in the studio today. He's a military and defence analyst and and it's great to see you in person. You're not on AI creation.
I'm not AI creation.
You're an actual
real.
interviewed Simon many times down the line, but he's here, which is great. Thank you to Jane, who's been in touch and says, I hope the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom mentions the UK. He is acting like the Prime Minister of the world. Once he gets back, he needs to look closer to home, as his own country is going down the pan by the day. Stuart says, Peter, I just can't believe Mike Amesbury walked free today when people are serving years who have not committed any violence. It just shows two-tier justice is alive and well. That's Stuart making reference to the MP who punched someone on so many occasions that they fell to the ground, and was given a short-ish sentence, which has now been suspended for 2 years. He will do community service. He will be going an anger management course. There may well be a recall petition in his constituency as well, and if 10% of his constituents decide they want a by-election, well then there could be a by-election, and no doubt Reform UK, who were a fairly distant second the last time, will be eyeing that one up and putting a lot of resources into it. We'll talk about that throughout the programme as well. We'll also in a second talk about the BBC and the fact that 500 media lovies, including Gary Lineker, have decided that they want the documentary back on air, back on the iPlayer, because they say that it's a terrible derogation of freedom of speech. Others might say, hold on a second, a Hamas terrorist's son was actually narrating it and that wasn't originally disclosed. So big failures in the accuracy and fairness aspect first, but also the BBC under a lot of fire in regard to its views on the Israeli-Gaza conflict. We'll talk to Nicole Lampert about that in a second. We've actually got the Shadow Culture Secretary, Stuart Andrew, coming up a little bit later in the programme about that as well. But let me know your thoughts on anything you've heard from Simon, or indeed any of those other topics, or anything you think we should be talking about. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Tories talk a good game, Labour even talking a good game, probably against the wishes of a lot of their MPs and their supporters, who apparently think we should have no borders whatsoever and everyone should come on in the water's lovely. But no one seems to ever get a grip on this.
No, so we have at least two bits of legislation that I think made life very, very difficult for the United Kingdom. The first is the Equalities Act, and the other is the Human Rights Act, which takes into our body of law the European Convention of Human Rights and makes the European Court the superior body for human rights.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, Harry Cole, the political editor of The Sun, is actually going to be in this seat next Thursday between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock. Let's hope he gets through security of this building a little bit faster than the White House, but he will be here. He will be presenting between 4 and 7 on Talk Drive next Thursday. But for the meantime, he's in Washington with the Prime Minister. He's going to join us as soon as he can, but just a few problems getting through security at the White House. Very, very tight security, as you can imagine, especially when there is not just the President, but a Prime Minister there. So we'll talk to Harry as soon as we can. Dean, talking about Keir Starmer, says he'll no doubt embarrass us on the international stage again. He is a waste of space. And Angela has been in touch on the Mike Amesbury decision. He was originally going to jail. Now that has been suspended for 2 years. So as long as he doesn't reoffend within 2 years, he won't actually serve time in prison. And thank you to the Red Ranger, who says, good hair going on, Cardi P. Well, that's very kind of you. It's actually all the work of Victoria, the hair and makeup artist, who makes me look vaguely human when I'm on these programmes. Now then, let's talk to Nicole Lambert, who is a journalist who follows events in regard to Israel and Jewish issues and anti-Semitism very, very closely. And Gary Lineker has criticised the BBC for pulling a Gaza documentary. This is Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone. This controversy has gone on now for about a week. We also know that the BBC is paying the Taliban propaganda wing so it can broadcast in Afghanistan. There are charges that are made by the Taliban, and we, the licence fee payer, are giving money to them, although some of the money comes from other sources as well. Nicole argues that the BBC is turning into a megaphone for Hamas, and she joins me now. Nicole, thank you for joining me this afternoon. I wonder if we could just talk about these 650 media figures criticising the BBC decision to pull a controversial documentary about Gaza. That we know as well there's a meeting going on this afternoon. Deborah Turness, who's the chief executive of BBC News, is setting out the events surrounding the film. That'll be attended by the Director General. Now, it's interesting, the letter, just to give them they're saying this, the 650 media figures say that the documentary, as they put it, is an essential piece of journalism. It offers an all too rare perspective, the letter goes, on the lived experiences of Palestinian children living in unimaginable circumstances, which amplifies voices so often silenced. It deserves recognition, not politically motivated censorship. We condemn the weaponisation of a child's identity and the racist insinuation that Palestinian narratives must be scrutinised through a lens of suspicion. We urge you to reject these tactics, protect vulnerable voices, and reaffirm your commitment to stories that hold power to account. Our screens and our society depend on it. What do you make of that?
I mean, I could have told you that this would happen. I could have told you the names that would be on the letter. It is more or less the same old names. I guess one of the interesting things is that Gary Lineker's on there. He's now about to finish his contract with the BBC, so obviously feels even more unleashed than he was before. As we know, he got into frequent trouble for his social media use, and since it was announced that he wouldn't be hosting Match of the Day at the end of his contract, then that's gone even, he's gone even more like this, more outspoken. So what do I make of it? I think they haven't really looked at the different issues that there are to do with the documentary. They haven't looked at the problems, and the very idea that calling someone who's the son of a Hamas minister, that somehow that's problematic is crazy.
It's context, it's factual, and actually I think my view on this, Nicole, is that there are actually two levels of problems. So I wonder what you think of this. So I worked for the BBC. I know you've worked very closely with the BBC and BBC journalists previously, and I read your article on Spiked, which is well worth a look. It's on the Spiked website. The BBC is turning into megaphone for Hamas is the headline. You can look it up. So the two issues for me, one I think is a really straightforward issue of accuracy, impartiality, just getting it right, the BBC's standards. I mean, I worked for the BBC for about 3 years, and just shy of that probably. And I mean, anytime you wanted to film a child or talk to a child or anything, you needed parental consent. You needed written parental consent. You needed to make sure that various procedures were followed, and you needed to be very, very clear about what they were doing, why they were doing it, and how it would be used. So those kind of conversations have to be had. And secondarily, then I think you get into the wider discussion about the BBC's coverage of Hamas, of what's going on in Gaza, and whether we're being told the full truth through this film. I mean, those to me are the two sort of linked but nonetheless separate strands of this. And I wonder what you think of that.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely key points, particularly when you're talking about children. But to widen that out, you would want to know who their parents are. Someone who from the BBC said if every audience member going on Question Time has their social media looked at. So how was it that David Collier, who first discovered this, was able to spend 4 or 5 hours and find very quickly he's a single man, as in he's on his own doing this research. All he's got is computer and Google Translate, and he was able to find out this material. So the idea that they don't know who it is ridiculous. They must have done. And one of the problems with using this boy is that he's the narrator as well, and that there are words that are being put in his mouth as the narrator. There are words that he wouldn't use as a child. But I would also say the fact that they chose him because he spoke good English, and he spoke good English because he went to the most expensive school. I think he says it in the documentary, in Gaza, and that's because he's the son of a Hamas minister. So they knew all of that, and that's not the only problematic aspect of the documentary. There's
so many. I mean, the £400,000 worth of licence fee payers' money that were used on it. The fact that there was some of the subtitles were not properly translated. There were people referring to death to the Jews, and that was translated to death to Israel, which is not the same thing. I mean, there are many issues with this. The cameraman who apparently was celebrating the 7th of October massacres. I mean, there just are so many aspects to this that they still haven't got to the bottom of a week on.
It's actually more than a week. I think David did his, I think it aired last Monday.
Okay.
And David came out with his investigations on the Tuesday. Lisa Nandy has been in the Commons today talking about it and said that she's demanded the answers to some of these things that we've talked about, including how much of our money, licence fee payers' money, went into the pockets of Hamas, the people that have, perpetuated the most horrific things. And we've seen the results of some of that. We talked last week about the return of the Bibas children and how Hamas enjoyed in the way they handed over those bodies. They've shown over the last few weeks exactly how they are terrorists. They've done things that are almost beyond imagination. And for example, not returning the right body of the Bibas mother, Shiri Bibas. So the idea that our money is going into their pockets is abhorrent. And it's something that the BBC should have an answer on by now, 9-10 days on.
And it's really interesting. Reg has been in touch and said, I would be very interested to know who else was standing behind the camera when the documentary was being made. And the response to this over the past, you've correctly corrected me, 10 days or so, has been, a flip-flopping and statements that contradicted one another. First of all, we were told they had full editorial control in London. Then we were told actually they did not have full editorial control, and there are things that they were not told, and they threw the independent production company under the bus in regard to that. I just wonder if you are convinced that we will get the truth on this, and an apology will be made, as it should be, by someone very senior in the BBC.
Well, I'm very glad that we do have Lisa Nandy now looking at this, and that there's government pressure, so I hope they will be. I think it's 2003 that there was a report into the BBC bias on this situation, on Israel-Palestine, and there was an expensive report that we, the taxpayers, the licence fee payers, paid for. It's called the Ballon Report. It never came out. So I seriously hope that not only is there a proper investigation, but that will just be the start of it, and then there'll be a proper investigation into the BBC, an independent one, not done by the BBC, and not just into this documentary, but then into the entire war and the way they've proceeded. As you know, we have talked about, and I'm sure many people on talkTV have noticed that they call their hostages prisoners, they call the prisoners hostages. They've got so much wrong on this. And then we haven't even talked about the fact that they have an Arab service where many of the reporters seem to revel in what happened on October 7. There are so many problems. And with the whole licence fee is coming up for debate all the time. We have so many more channels now that there is always going to be a discussion about, is it worth us maintaining a BBC? Is it worth us being taxed for it? And so they're not helping themselves by this seeming kind of cozying
on
up.
the aspect as well that's emerged today in regard to payments to the Taliban's propaganda wing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a different issue, but it's linked in that as licence fee taxpayers, do we want to be paying for a radio station or whatever it is in Afghanistan, even though that will mean that we are effectively paying money to the Taliban. We're in some dodgy places as it is, but the very good report written by David Rosen and Heard, basically says that the BBC are the only independent people in there, and that's because they've appear to have agreed to more censorship than the other organisations that were there. And so that's worrying. So are we simply paying for censored news to go into the pockets of the Taliban to say what the Taliban are saying? Because if we are, then what is the point of us paying for that?
Nicole, thank you very much. That's Nicole Lambert there, journalist, and we will talk to her, I'm sure, again soon on this. It's really interesting, actually, that Jane has been in touch to say day after day the BBC are the story, one scandal after another. Just scrap the licence fee, let it go to subscription. The 170 quid saved will come in handy towards the next electric bill, and we know that energy prices are certainly going up. We'll talk to the Shadow Culture Secretary of the Conservatives, Stuart Andrew, about that a little bit later on. But let's talk to Ian now. He is in London. Ian, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say about this BBC documentary?
Hello again.
Hello
again, Peter.
Hi.
Right, I've got 2 points.
Go for it.
First of all, we as the taxpayer give the money to the BBC to make all these programmes, right?
Yeah.
We don't give them money to give to a terrorist organisation.
Yeah.
Now, the simple factor is, going back on a slight offshoot to it, the father of this boy is supposed to be the director of agriculture in
he's a minister for agriculture in the Hamas regime. Yeah,
right. The main people that went in originally, before October the 7th, going on were all agricultural workers working on these kibbutzes. They did all the sort of spying to see where to attack.
I don't think there's any doubt that this boy's father is a senior ranking Hamas, they would say, official. Everyone who's involved with Hamas is a terrorist. It is a terrorist organisation, not that the BBC will tell you that. And that is a very, very concerning aspect of this.
Right, so it just proves, yet again, the BBC don't want it to come out. They are so indebted with the whole thing of like anti-Israel, anti-Semitism there. It is a joke. But the trouble is that, as we know, with Gary Lineker, he just thinks he's become a god, that they can't touch him. Right?
Yeah,
and it is
I agree with that.
With all these ones, Ken Loach, all of these ones, Zawali, Nadia Zawali, she's an actress, the one that was in Absolute Fabulous.
Yeah.
Right?
Nadia Zawali, yeah.
She did a video that was out the other day. It was disgusting. It was downright disgusting. You've got these Australian nurses that say they want to kill Jews in the hospitals, but they say that, according to the BBC, no, they don't want to treat them. Right? Know that they want to murder them. We've had it here in the hospitals, local to me at Whipps Cross, they had it.
Yeah. Listen, there are all sorts of aspects of this, Ian, that I think we need to cover, we need to talk about. Thank you for your call. Time has beaten us, but thank you for the points you raise, Ian. Should say that I actually started to read this out earlier. Angela on Twitter says, two-tier Keir once again, whilst Hurdy Word tweet people are still in jail. That's in regard to Mike Amesbury. Angela sent that on Twitter. And the latest from the White House, and we will hear from the White House soon, it has urged the United Kingdom to increase defence spending again up to 5% of GDP, what the country makes, ahead of Keir Starmer's meeting with Donald Trump that is coming very soon in the next 40 minutes or so. A senior Trump administration has told The Telegraph that President Trump does continue to urge our NATO allies to increase their spending even further towards 5% to address years of defence underfunding. Lots to discuss on that. We will talk to Steve Gill, former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations, in just a second.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Chloe. He says, Peter, can you stop saying backstop? I'm getting flashbacks to Brexit means Brexit and Theresa May. I'm forever traumatised. Well, I lived through it as a special advisor, Chloe, and I still have the therapy bills to prove it, it must be said. It's interesting, just in regard to Stramer at the White House, this idea of a backstop, a military backstop, backing up, essentially, what would be British and French and a few other nations' troops as well. But actually, will this negotiation go well? It's going to happen, or start at least. The two men are going to meet in the White House in just over half an hour's time, and we'll bring that to you live here on Talk. But a YouGov poll, one of the big polling companies, suggests that only 1 in 4 people actually believe Keir Starmer will be any good at negotiating with Trump. What can he get out of this meeting? Well, let's talk to Steve Gill. He's a former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations. Steve, great to have you on the programme this afternoon.
Hey, Peter.
How do we expect this to go? How much do you think, how good a listener do you think Donald Trump will be in this meeting?
Trump doesn't listen a lot, and I think we'll get a good indication of how well this might go right when Starmer shows up at the front door of the White House. You know, when Macron showed up there the other day, Trump was not there to greet him at the front door. We'll see if Donald Trump is there on the front steps when Starmer pulls up to the White House. I think the problem that Keir Starmer has is that Trump has a long memory and will recall all the negative, really abusive things that Starmer and some of his top leaders have said about Trump personally, dispatching
what is it about the Foreign Secretary having called him a Nazi sympathising sociopath that I think he might object to?
Past is past. I mean, you know, Trump doesn't have any vindictiveness in his body. But sending, you know, people from labor to help campaign against him. But, you know, again, I don't think that Trump will be, you know, very upfront about showing concern about the past, but I don't think it's going to be a warm embrace. And then you put to the policy things. There are serious policy differences between what Starmer is asking for and what Trump is willing to deliver. Again, Trump keeps repeating, you know, we're not going to keep funding the Ukraine war. We're not going to keep funding more of the missiles and bombs. We're not going to keep paying the bill for NATO when Europe needs to step up and do that. None of that has anything to do with personal animosity. But as I've said to you before, Peter, Trump believes in personal diplomacy. And wise leaders will be finding those personal connections with Trump. That will work. And whether it's the EU leaders, whether it's Starmer, those who haven't learned that lesson are going to pay a price. Yes,
and I think that is a very, very good point, that idea of personal diplomacy and where this all goes. I wonder whether this is just part of the, what's the word I'm looking for, the conveyor belt of meetings, because he's had Macron, as you mentioned. Now President Trump has Starmer, and we know Zelensky is going to be there tomorrow from Ukraine. How seriously, this is a huge thing for Starmer, but is it actually that big a deal for Trump?
Well, I don't think Trump gains from anything other than continuing the drumbeat that if you don't bring us parity with tariffs, if our tariffs are lower than what you're imposing on our goods and our services, that's not going to work. And we're going to hit you with tariffs, and that will destroy European economies that are already teetering on the brink. You're seeing him say, you know, we're going ahead with the tariffs of 25% on Canada and Mexico.
On the EU.
And the EU. And again, that's not going to be a point that Trump is going to back off unless or until we see tariffs on U.S. products lowered. And we're already seeing companies come to the U.S. to avoid those tariffs. So I think Europe, I think Britain, I think China, Canada, Mexico are all going to pay a price if they continue to just hope that Donald Trump doesn't mean it.
I just wonder, I asked this question of a guest earlier on today, but I wonder if you're surprised at the pace that things are going in regard to those talks in Istanbul, we know, between Russia and the United States in regard to Ukraine, and the pace of diplomacy in the last few weeks. I mean, it's almost hard to believe that Donald Trump hasn't even been president for a second time for a month and a half.
You know, we have both worked in government, Peter. We know that there is a snail pace of bureaucracy in government. This is cheetahs on steroids. We were told that Trump would be shock and awe, and I don't think any of us, you know, believed how fast and how quickly they would move. Isn't it also interesting that we're normally given the touch point, the timeline of media? We're going to judge the president after the first 100 days. They're trying to give him a report card after 30 days because he's moved so quickly. and they're trying to kneecap him before he really even gets his full pace in. So I think I'm surprised at the pace. What really also surprises me, and again, your experience in government will underline this, the complete lack of leaks. There are no leaks coming out of the Trump White House. That is amazing. And again, we both worked in government. That is impossible.
Well, it's early days, but and they have a very clear sense of purpose, certainly. But we will see what happened there. What's been the reaction in the United States? Actually, you mentioned that point about the tariffs. Donald Trump had told his cabinet that the European Union had been formed in order to screw the United States, is what he said, and that 25% tariffs on European goods, including cars, would be introduced soon. The tariff threats haven't really come to a huge amount in regard to other countries. They've been used very effectively as a weapon, but I just wonder whether you think those 25% tariffs will actually happen, and if not, what Donald Trump can actually extract from the EU in the instance that they don't.
I think that they won't actually happen, not because Trump doesn't mean it, but because I think that you will see folks like Stramer and others coming and reversing course. I mean, 2 days ago, Zelensky said, there is no way we will agree to any of this, and now he's dashing to Washington to sign the deal. So you see big movement after the blustery responses from European and other world leaders. So I don't know that it will be necessary to actually impose the tariffs, because I think there will be movement in the right direction. Now, does there have to be absolute parity immediately with tariffs and taxes imposed on U.S. goods? I don't think so. I think if it's a track in the right direction, that Trump will reverse trend and not impose the full amount.
Steve, thank you. That's Steve Gill. He's a former advisor to the Clinton and Bush administrations. We've got Harry Coles, finally got through security at the White House. He's going to speak to us after the break. Stay tuned for that.
We know that they will do anything. And I'm not just talking about the Islamists. I'm not just talking about particular communities. Again, I'm talking about the enablers, the useful idiots, the chattering class. They will do anything. And even rape, the rape of children, they will put that second to their vision of a glorious utopian multicultural society that really doesn't exist, that has never existed, and is just getting worse and worse. And many people in this country cannot see a
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
We are moments away from speaking to Harry Cole at the White House, as promised, over the last 46 minutes. But first, let's speak to David in Exeter, who's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. David, it's a very fast-moving situation. I know you know a lot about defence. You've been on the programme before. What do you think they will discuss? What should they discuss? What should the outcome be?
Well, I think it's the writing was on the wall for quite some time. Obviously, we've seen this Munich Defence Conference with Pete Hesketh and Vance saying, step up, you need to be ready for fighting. Subsequent, we've had Stramer at the dispatch box earlier in the week saying he's going to raise defence spending. There seems to be some ambiguity there with it 13 or 6 billion between him and Healy.
Well, he says it's straightforward. He says it's this financial year and the 26-27 financial year.
Yeah. So I think the context is the amount of money is inappropriate and the timing is completely inappropriate. And for Trump now come back and say, look, you need to be spending more, he's bang on the button. This is exactly correct, and they need to be doing it now, and they're not. So what are they not telling us, Peter? The bit that's missing from this is the capital procurement that would need to take place. Where are they going to spend the money? Who with? Are we going to be doing it with Babcock, BAE, Rolls-Royce, or are we going to be doing it off the shelf of America? Or are we going to be going with Ursula's, or I say we, is Stramer going to be spending the money with Ursula in her common EU defence procurement, a defence union? That's the question. I think Trump has got a whiff of this, and he's gone, no, I don't think that's right, because think of that comment he made in the cabinet meeting. The EU was
screwing the America in his view.
Well, now put defence and security in that context. And now let's start with this one. So, I've done a lot of this common EU procurement with Anne Widdecombe and Nigel Farage. Now, the big problem we've got, you cannot do anything in military terms with defence and security in Europe without a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
Now, the only people that have got nuclear weapons in Europe are Britain and France. And it's there's an overarching from the US.
Yeah.
So this, we're seeing the incoming German leader, Friedrich, saying, we can't rely on America. We've got to go our own way. When he says our own way, he means with European Defence Union.
And it is a very complex. Situation in regard to defence. There, David, we'll talk again, I'm sure. But I've just got to go to Harry Cole now, who's at the White House. Harry, you finally got through security. Well done.
Hi, Peter. Yeah, that was a bit of an effort. Makes Downing Street security look a little bit like a playground, frankly. Lots of big Secret Service, lots of Secret Service people going through my bag. They're
all about 7'12" as well, aren't they? Yes. Well, listen.
That's right.
We'll make sure you get through security next Thursday when you are in this very seat presenting Talk Drive. So that will be great between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock next Thursday. But for this Thursday, for today, Harry, the day that it's in, can you just bring us up to date about your last 24 hours? You've been speaking to Stramer on the plane on the way over. He's had a big event with Lord Mandelson, the new ambassador. Just bring us right up to date in terms of what's been happening.
So we're waiting right now for Stramer to arrive. He's sort of minutes away. He spent the morning huddled up in briefings with his top team, getting ready for what is really a make-or-break sort of summit for him. I just asked Theresa May what a bad relationship with Donald Trump can be like for a British Prime Minister, and he's going to be around, he hopes, for as long as Trump is in the White House. So this first meeting at the White House with Donald Trump as president has been weeks in the planning, and he is desperate for it to go well. But of course there are a lot of bear traps where it could go wrong. On the way over, on the flight, he came back, had a chat with the press. I've never seen a Prime Minister do a sort of a better impression of trying to be completely calm and relaxed, but also desperate not to put a single foot wrong before he gets across the door here in the White House, gets into the Oval Office. We hope in about half an hour's time. Now, he was saying, look, I'm not going to get ahead of the meetings. I'm not going to get ahead of the meetings. But what is clear is he is here for one big ask when it comes to Ukraine. He has made a big offer for British troops to police any future negotiated peace in Ukraine with Russia, but he's being very clear that says that has to be a credible deterrent for it to be a lasting peace rather than just a ceasefire that would allow Putin to rearm and come back for another go. So he needs to convince Donald Trump, who has been very vocal, saying this is a European problem, America needs its money back, doesn't want to get involved anymore. Will they still have US air power? That's crucially what he's after, as a sort of backstop, a sort of a last resort, underwriting a European defence of Ukraine, because the accepted reality of the world is Europe has underspent on defence for too long, and we don't have the capability to be a credible threat without the might of America. Now, that doesn't just mean missiles and bombers, but, you know, they will be there as a sort of implicit threat. It's spy planes, spy satellites, infrastructure from the air to protect whichever European troops do eventually, hopefully, end up on the ground, in Starmer's view, policing a negotiated peace deal.
Yes, it's very interesting. And just to go back to the phrase you used at the very start there, Harry, make or break. I mean, in what way will this be judged a success if Starmer gets what he wants? Because that, in the context of what you're talking about, seems to be pretty unlikely.
I don't think we're going to expect any great breakthroughs here today in terms of Ukraine. Obviously, Starmer's hosting a summit of European leaders to report back on he and Macron have sort of negotiated. These talks are going to take months potentially. You know, Ukraine will continue to be fighting for many, many weeks and months yet, whatever the peace settlement looked like. But for a successful Starmer today, I think it's getting out the lion's den without getting his head chewed off. The thing is that Donald Trump is an incredibly, volatile person. He can blow up. People are saying, around Keir Starmer are saying, well, he's got a good relationship, which means that he can have the hard conversations because they've got a good relationship, which means he can speak truth to power. We'll see how that goes for him. There are lots and lots of different smaller issues, not necessarily less important, but smaller issues than Ukraine, where this could go on. What are they going to say about tariffs, where Donald Trump has threatened 25% tariffs on the EU?
Has Starmer reacted to that at all, Harry? Did he react to that on the plane at all, or
not really? No, he was very, very coy. He very much wanted to get in the building before he would start to talk about anything. But Brexit Britain, his trump card essentially is the fact we've left the EU, so he isn't going to be necessarily caught up immediately in tariff retaliation between the EU and the US. But the problem is that, and I think the Americans know this, Keir Starmer is trying to renegotiate his position with the EU. And if we closely align once again with Brussels on a whole slew of EU border checks and EU laws, what's the point of a US trade deal? If as Donald Trump said yesterday, he hates the EU. He thinks it was designed to screw America. And so for a Prime Minister trying to suck up to the Americans and ride the European horse, it's going to be a tricky balancing act for that. Then, of course, we've got the Chagos deal, where British officials are saying, actually, the Americans don't even care about this. We'll see.
David
about
Lammy,
that.
the Foreign Secretary, saying that actually Trump has a veto if he doesn't like what it looks like.
Well, he does. He does have a veto, but also we're the ones picking up the tab. So we might end up in the worst of all worlds, if we're paying for a bad deal that actually America gets deal out of, but we're the ones paying the bill. So again, fall out on that. And then if you look at J.D. Vance, the vice president, look at Elon Musk, the first buddy they call him, they have been very vocal on grooming gangs, on free speech in Britain, on two-tier justice in Britain. I think the last thing that Keir Starmer would want to have to do is have a conversation about British domestic issues, but that could be brought into line today with the news that the influencer Andrew Tate is currently on his way to Florida, negotiated an exit out of Romania by the US government, but he's wanted on rape and human trafficking charges. He denies them, but he's wanted on those charges in the UK. Will Starmer seek extradition? Will all of these conversations could come up. So if we don't get out of this, as I said to Ian Collins earlier, if I'll come back tomorrow, and if we haven't got a decent story, I'll eat my hat.
Yeah, well, indeed. I think Andrew Tate has now actually arrived in America. We've heard that. But yes, Harry, it's fascinating, certainly, with the Chagos deal, because this is in many ways far more important for Keir Starmer than for Donald Trump. And I wonder, just when you mentioned the first buddy and J.D. Vance and other things, I mean, it only takes one tweet or one remark to be reported from a Trump administration official on domestic issues to change the whole nature of this. But I wonder what your impression of the Trump White House has been so far, because it does seem to be largely, not all the time in Ukraine, but on most issues, it does seem to be a fairly well-disciplined White House, more so than the last 4 years of Donald Trump anyway, although it's early days. Oh, Harry appears to have frozen. There we are. Well, we had him for a reasonable amount of time, I suppose. That is Harry Cole. He is the political editor of The Sun. He is in Washington with the... we got Harry Cole back. He is waiting for Keir Starmer. Harry, I don't know if you heard my question there. I was just asking, it would only take one tweet from Elon Musk or J.D. Vance or whomever to sort of put this all off course. I wonder as well, how seriously Trump will be taking this, because there's sort of a conveyor belt, isn't there? He's had Macron, now it's Keir Starmer, and tomorrow it's Zelensky. So you're talking about this being make or break for Starmer, but actually for Donald Trump, is this just another day at the office?
Well, look, the special relationship, I know we needily go on about it a lot, but, it is a lot deeper than just who's in the White House and who's in Downing Street. The security infrastructure between these two countries, the technological sharing, the spy sharing, it is a deep relationship. This is an important one. Trump knows that. He's also a big fan of the royal family. He's got great links to Scotland. He's got his golf courses in the UK. He takes a keen interest in the United Kingdom. I think Starmer has rolled the pitch pretty well to make that clear. He's coming here with in his back pocket, he's got an invitation for Trump to visit Balmoral. He is royal mad. So I do think this is more than your standard visit, but all the more reason for it to go wrong there.
So just talk us through what happens in about sort of 15-20 minutes time. Starmer arrives. What happens over the next couple of hours?
There's enough sort of military types who've turned up to start a coup, I'd say, around here. I wish I could turn the camera around and show you, but they're clearly lining up. Starmer's due to arrive any minute now. There's lots of soldiers and sailors and Marines coming around with flags. He'll go in, have a quick chat. He will then do a one-on-one meeting with Donald Trump, just the two of them. So, God, wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall for that bit of it? Then they'll have what the Americans affectionately call a spray, which is where we get our first chance to yell questions at both Trump and Starmer in the Oval Office. Those things can go on. Sometimes, under Biden, they were very short because he didn't like asking questions. But this is a president that quite likes engaging and sparring with the press. So hopefully we'll get some information there. Then they're going to go off for lunch with their officials. I think the foreign secretaries are joining, Marco Rubio on their side and David Lammy on ours. They'll have a couple of hours talks, and then we're meant to, I think about 8 p.m. UK time, they'll be doing that joint press conference. Now, traditionally these things can be quite short, 1 or 2 questions on either side. But this is Donald Trump. Some of them go on 45 minutes to an hour. So it could be a long afternoon. Downing Street would love it if this was a damp squib and it sort of went off without a hitch and no major stories or fallouts or dramas. But I think the odds on that are certainly against them.
Okay, Harry at the White House. Thank you. That's Harry Cole, the political editor of The Sun at the White House. He'll be covering all of that in the paper tomorrow and online, of course, as well. You can join the Sun Club. I'm now a member of that. Harry will be in this seat, actually, this day next week on Thursday, presenting Talk Drive. So do tune in for that next Thursday between 4 and 7. We'll bring you that press conference. We'll bring you various live shots and so on. Starmer coming very, very soon to the White House. We'll discuss it in depth over the next couple of hours between now and 7. We expect that press conference at 7 o'clock. That will be part, presumably, of Kevin O'Sullivan's programme if things are on time anyway. But let me know your thoughts on all of this. 0344 499 1000. We've got some calls in a minute.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good evening. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. If you're one of the Cardwellers, or maybe you're sitting at home or somewhere else watching or listening to the programme. It's a big dramatic day, an important day for our country, I think, as the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is at the White House. He's almost there. He's going to arrive probably in the next 10 or 15 minutes or so. If you're watching, there is a live shot on the screen. We will see if Donald Trump meets him at the door, but certainly there's going to be a lot that goes on. They're going to be meeting, talking about all sorts of issues, including defence, Ukraine, the Chagos Islands, over the next few hours, and that is happening in Washington now. We've been hearing from Harry Cole, the political editor of The Sun. We're going to hear from US political commentator Michael Graham in a second. A former embassy official will bring you all the news as it happens there, and there's a lot of other things that have happened as well, particularly including the Tate brothers, Andrew Tate and Tristan Tate, who have arrived in the United States. It's interesting as well, we've got lots of reaction from various people to the fact that Gary Lineker has criticised the BBC for pulling a documentary on Gaza. We'll talk to Stuart Andrew, who's the Shadow Culture Secretary, this hour as well as bringing you everything that is happening at the White House. So there's loads to discuss. I want to make sure I get some calls on. I apologise, we got one on last hour. There was so much happening, but we'll get plenty more on between now and 7 o'clock. So make sure you lift the phone and give us a ring on 0344 499 1000. You can text me at 7222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, you can send me a voice note on 0344 499 1000. Be sure to keep it to less than a minute if you could. And you can send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring on that number, 0344 499 1000. Let's get started here on Talk. Very interesting thoughts from Carol as well on Twitter, who says, let's be honest here, Lammy and Starmer didn't expect Trump to win the election. That's why they went ahead with the Chagos deal. Now it's all backfired and they are backpedaling at speed. Karma will win, I believe in it, and they both deserve to be out of their jobs. Well, Keir Starmer is very much in the job of Prime Minister at the moment. As I say, if you're watching us on your connected device, on YouTube or your smart TV or however you're watching, you can see that live feed there from the White House. Plenty of military officials, lots of journalists. You can see in the background not just the White House on the left-hand side of the screen, but also the old executive office building next to it, which is where a lot of the administration actually happens, and many of the Trump people are working. We can see that there is a Marine there who is getting the door ready for Keir Starmer to arrive. That'll probably happen in 10 or 15 minutes time. We'll bring you those arrival shots and I'll describe it for the many, many people who are listening on the radio as well. But in the meantime, let's talk to Michael Graham, who is a US political commentator. He's also the managing editor of Inside Sources. Michael, this is a very important moment for Keir Starmer. It's probably the biggest meeting of his life, actually. Will it be really register that much for Donald Trump? He's got roughly what he wants in terms of Ukraine, and certainly an increase in defence spending that the UK has agreed to.
Yeah, so everything is a win for Donald Trump, even when it's not a win. That's how he spins everything. And plus, there's so much going on. I mean, when you're in the middle of all the fights he's in, nothing personal, but the UK, when you're trying to deal with Russia, China, the invasion of Ukraine, the space for, thinking about the UK for the average voter is kind of, smallish. I will say, though, I think there's real opportunity for the PM because the talk of the UK being not the EU in its trade relationships with the US, not the EU in, say, a military deal. I think that's a real, Trump loves to wheel and deal. And so if it's the EU and you got 23 people or whatever, I forget the number, I apologize, but Liechtenstein, are you in the back of the room? But if you've got
I think there are 27 members of the EU off the top of my head.
You've got one person, you've got one nation, you've got, deal. I think there's something there. For example, Trump's going to do whatever ends up doing with tariffs. We don't know how much of it he means. The UK's portion of our imports of steel is very small. I think we imported 54.6 million tons and you guys were the 0.6. But at the same time, it's a deal for you And that's the kind of space where Keir Starmer could say, hey, look, blah, blah, blah. You want us to say how great you are. You want a little help on this. It's a small, for you, how about a deal that lets Keir Starmer walk away with, if he's ready to deal. If, however, he wants to do what most people on the European left want to do, which is judge and moralize, Trump's just got no time for him. And look, I say this as I'm not a Trump fan. I'm an old school Reagan internationalist. I think the Republican Party that I'm a part of exists for two reasons: cut taxes and kill commies. And so anytime we can give guns to the Ukrainians to shoot Russians, that's me. But I also have to admit that Trump's argument that, wait a minute, Russia it sent the little green men, 10 years ago? You had Crimea, and in the meantime, Germany's military readiness has gone down. The UK's readiness has gone down. I mean, this isn't a theoretical, you know what I mean? It's not like you can't say, oh my gosh, I had no idea Russia was going to be moving towards Europe. The argument that it's not if Europe doesn't care enough to stop Russia, why should America? And
that's a fair point that I'm sure many Americans will make, especially in the context of this minerals deal. And I wonder, one question I've sort of been posing over the last hour or so of this programme is in regard to this idea of security guarantees. And Keir Starmer says that he wants security guarantees. He wants a kind of backstop, a backup force from America that would support the British and French troops and others, the 30,000 strong proposed troops that would go to Ukraine. I just wonder what security guarantees actually look like, because if there's a $500 billion deal, well, surely that in itself actually has some form of security guarantee that actually says, hold on a second, there are essentially guarantees anyway, because the US wants to guarantee that money, which Donald Trump says is payback for all that the United States has done for Ukraine.
So this goes back to the founding of the United States, where there was the conversation about ideology versus interests. And the founders believed that if people didn't have an interest, it didn't matter how you could write flowery words about democracy and blah, 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 didn't matter. After World War II, we went through this kind of ideology phase where America wanted to be the fortress of democracy, the arsenal of democracy. We were pushing these ideas that, peaked with Iraq, I think you could say. And now we're back in the era of interest. And it's a very pragmatic argument to make. Look, if the U.S. has, the elements we need to make our cell phones and to make our solar panels and to make our high-end widgets coming out of Ukraine, and Russia starts to impinge that supply, it doesn't matter if you are flag waver, commie, left or right. It's, holy crap, we're going to lose money here. Holy crap, our factories are going to be hurt. And so in the world that Trump sees it, which, by the way, has been the world most of the time, it's if there's nothing in it for us, why would we put American soldiers at risk? Why would we put American dollars in the game? I'm curious about what the backstop looks like, because once again, if the message is America should protect Ukraine and maybe Europe can help, that you've lost that fight. In fact, I've been surprised by the number of Democrats who are kind of quietly admitting that fight's over. But if the argument is, you know what? Russia stinks. Look at Ukraine, underarmed, small country. They held them off. Russia's a paper tiger. We definitely have the military skills and wealth to stop Russia. We don't need America to do this. We can do it. But hey, America, we want you to. And then that's where I get confused. Like, do you want us to have a stockpile of weapons that we're prepared to front forward to you if war should break out? Is there money? Do we have money that we commit that if this happens, we'll send money? I know it's that with this president, it's never going to be troops. It's not going to be fighter pilots. It might be the planes, but not the pilots. He's never going to commit to putting an American life at risk to protect Europe. That's your job, is his argument.
Let me ask you a bit about the Chagos Islands, because this is a big controversy, especially for a lot of our viewers and listeners, in terms of the United Kingdom the proposal is to give away territory, British overseas territory, to the Mauritians, who are basically in bed with the Chinese. We know Diego Garcia, one of the islands, is incredibly important because there's an American military base on there. There are big security implications for all of that. How big an issue is this in the United States, and how much do you think ordinary people in the United States care about it, and how much do you think President Trump cares about it?
If we stopped 100 people on the streets of Washington, D.C., and more than 2 of them knew what Chagos Islands meant, I'd be stunned. I mean, and it's partially us. We are not foreign policy people. I make fun of that a lot here on Talk, but it's just true. And then the other part is
they did say that Bill Clinton's foreign policy experience was at the International House of Pancakes.
Exactly. And so then there's also the other thing, which is Donald Trump has set American politics on fire by running out of the gate, doing 500 things a day. So even, we're never going to penetrate. But I will say this. The attitude of the average kind of son of America, if you explain the situation to them, they would think Panama Canal. Why did we give away the Panama Canal? Jimmy Carter, a good liberal, said, well, it's just the right thing to do. Now looking back, does anyone think that it's better that the Panama Canal, and once again, not the country, whatever, I'm sure maybe give them more wealth, maybe whatever, you can do things, but the actual thing, America should control that because it's too important. Does Britain really still think giving up Hong Kong made sense? Hasn't this turned out to be a total fiasco?
Yes, it has.
It certainly has not helped the cause of freedom, democracy, and capitalism. And so then the third part is anything you say that ends with which will help China, you're going to get about an 80-20 against vote in the United States. Americans have very much internalized hating China. China is the new Russia, and it goes back pre-Trump. It goes back to the perception. For example, my father was a TV repairman. There was a day when you could do that for a living. He had a business for 30 years. In 10 years, his business disappeared because of cheap imports from China, no tariffs, no protection, no nothing. His whole business just went out. Boom. He had the biggest business in the entire state of South Carolina where I grew up, and it just disappeared. And there's people like that across the country who they worked in factories and manufacturing and in sales, and what they did ended when China poured onto the international market.
And they may well reasonably say, well, this is a president who is putting, as he puts it, America first, and these tariffs, we don't actually care about these other countries. They can look after themselves. Right. It should be American homes, businesses, businessmen and women, and manufacturing that comes first. And that is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. There are quite a few people who are viewers and listeners to this programme that admire Donald Trump's patriotism and would argue that that isn't replicated from Keir Starmer. And that's a big aspect of this. This appears to our viewers and listeners anyway to be a big difference between the two men.
But there's also a big difference between the two national circumstances. Why was Britain the king of the world for 150 years, this tiny little country? Partially because of technology, partially because of geography, where you were located. You could influence Europe. You had the seagoing nation. You went across to Asia and America and everything. And now we're in this situation where China and America are two massive land masses and peoples. When it comes to tariffs, we don't need the trade the way that, by definition, the UK should need trade. I'm saying? It should be a hub of where stuff comes and where money flows and whatever. And so I just think you're in a tougher position if the world starts retrenching. And because it seems to me, and it's always seemed to me, that from Brexit, the opportunity has been to be the smart Europe. Europe does dumb EU things that come out of, the Belgian building knuckleheads run. And you guys do. We're never going to be America, like we're not that, because that's not our culture. But we're going to be more, capitalism, more small government, more liberal, more open. And to me, the thing that outrages me about the issue of immigration is there are all these great ideas that have to do with openness and trade where we could all get wealthier and be safer and happier. And the extremists on immigration who wanted to open the borders everywhere, who said any regulations are bad, they've now closed a bunch of doors in addition to the immigration door. And that's the real tragedy. London could be the powerhouse economic hub between East and West. And part of the thing that's getting in the way is the changes that have come because no one trusts the people in charge to have their hand on the door. Although
Keir Starmer, who is, we hope, arriving at the White House in just a few minutes' time, he's about a minute and a half late, but we will tell you.
He's got to go through the metal detector. They got to pat him down. There's all that.
Well, we had actually Harry Cole, who's the political editor of The Sun, it was about 45 minutes late for what we had to want to discuss with him because all those Secret Service agents were going through his bags. But yes.
Hey, we've seen those Mission Impossible movies.
It's
not really your guy. it's Tom Cruise in a mask.
That's right.
Who we're gonna get.
I'm sure it's Tom Cruise. I think they're perhaps a little bit taller.
Hey, you can laugh, but most Americans get their foreign policy information from Mission Impossible movies. So
well, listen, they're a very useful cultural resource. I think those Secret Service people are probably a little bit taller than Tom Cruise, but that doesn't take much. It must be said. I mean, Keir Starmer is someone who has described himself as a bridge between or wants to be a bridge, certainly in the last couple of weeks, between Ukraine and America. Is he seen that way? Do you think that's a realistic way to describe himself? Because we have lots of different NATO countries, lots of Western European countries saying lots of different things in regard to what their position, what their input should be, especially when it comes to Ukraine. And this comes into an idea of the special relationship as well. I'm not sure, having lived and worked in Washington, whether that's the way the Washingtonians, the administration, or Donald Trump himself will necessarily see it. I just wonder what you think, Michael.
I think that Donald Trump steps over everybody. You know, Trump has put himself in it. I was listening to some very smart analysts this morning who said that they don't think there'll be a final deal for Ukraine, Russia, and, the war until Trump and Putin are in the room together. Trump wants to sit there and sign that document. And so whether it's Keir Starmer saying, here's what we think the UK can do as far as troops, whether it's Macron saying France is prepared to go this far but no farther, I think for the American people, Trump seems to be in the center of it. And by the way, I don't think it's just the American people. I think Trump really has put himself in the center of this in a way that, presidents in the past probably would not have. So Americans are watching Trump. They'll follow Trump's lead, either agree or disagree, but that's how we're processing it. And then if Trump says, okay, we're going to go forward and I'm going to make commitments to Europe, I want to know how he makes them. Does he make them to NATO? He loves shaking NATO's cage. Does he really want to help NATO? Or does he make them to Britain is committed to doing X, therefore we're going to, sell arms or give support to Britain. France has agreed to do Y, and therefore we're going to do this. I'll be curious to see how Trump, the deal maker, if he doesn't find ways to make maybe not individual deals, but side deals, I guess I would say.
Yes. Michael, thank you. That's Michael Graham there, who is a US political commentator. He's also the managing editor of Inside Sources. We're keeping an eye on what is happening at the White House. I now calculate that Keir Starmer is 4.5 minutes late for his, later than we were told he would arrive. We'll talk to another Michael Martins, a former political specialist at the US Embassy in London, in just a second. But I want to just get a few of your messages in here in regard to this. Bill in Romsey says, when Starmer comes back with his tail between his legs, he will spin it. If Trump says no to the Chagos deal, Starmer will say, I changed my mind for the benefit of the UK. Well, certainly on Chagos, we have heard that David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary and Celebrity Mastermind contestant, has said that the US has a veto on all of that. Stephen in East Yorkshire says, if Trump and Starmer have a televised Q&A session later, yes they will, about 7 o'clock, how is our useless Prime Minister going to react without referring to copious written notes? He can't think on his feet, so it's likely the UK will be embarrassed yet again, says Steve. Michael in Norfolk says, I believe President Trump will veto the Chagos deal and on our defence budget increase too little too late. Jane says, if the President and Vice President don't agree with the Prime Minister, is that classed as hurty words? Andrew says, what is Starmer going to say when inevitably an American journalist asked him if he still feels he's a fascist or misogynist? I can't wait to see his face. Well, it seems that Donald Trump has forgiven people like David Lammy, for example, who described him as a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, which doesn't strike me as particularly nice. Kev and Ripley in Derbyshire says it would be absolutely delicious if before they started talking, President Trump gave a warning to the press to be careful what they say or ask, because he would hate to hear they're being arrested back in the UK for criticising two-tier Keir. Great show, says Kev. Thank you. And one more just before we speak to Michael Martins. Ali says the UK should demand some of this mineral deal. Well, I wonder how far they would get with that. We are keeping an eye on the White House. For those listening on the radio, which is the majority of people, I will let you know as soon as Keir Starmer arrives. He's about 6 minutes late, but in the meantime we have that shot there on the screen for people who are watching on the screen. Michael Martins is a former political specialist at the US Embassy in London. He was there under the original Trump administration and joins me now. Michael, thanks for joining me. What do you think is at stake here for certainly for the United States, first of all?
Well, nice to see you, Peter, and thanks for having me. I think for the U.S. right now, Starmer has come over. He's tried to soften the ground as best as he can for what is ultimately the ask of American military presence in Ukraine after the ceasefire and after the war ends. And that's, as one of your listeners or viewers mentioned, President Trump might think of it as too little, too late. 0.2% of GDP over 3 years is not that big of a sum in President Trump's mind. So I think what's at stake will be, like, in practical terms, kind of how is this relationship going to work for the next 4 years? Because if Starmer's going to come over, ask for this big ask that instinctively President Trump is kind of going to be against, like, President Trump might just ask for more. And I really want to see how Starmer plays that one.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I should say there are lots of Marines, or what appear to be Marines, with flags, having a sort of honour guard for Keir Starmer coming. So I think his arrival is pretty imminent, I would imagine. I may have to interrupt you in a second, Michael, when that happens. Just in regard to the increase from 2.3% of what the country makes to 2.5% that Keir Starmer has committed to, there'll be a lot of pressure, I'm sure, in this meeting from President Trump to get that up, perhaps even double it to 5%. That is certainly what President Trump has wanted. He thinks that there's so many European allies that are way behind. And all of this, I would imagine from your perspective as well, Michael, it does feed in to the discussions around Ukraine. What do you think of that conversation?
Yeah, I think President Trump's treating it like a negotiation, right? He wants a higher number and he wants it faster. And I think that whenever he would come to visit the UK, that would be his and his team's first question is, what is the UK spending on defense? And I think he's going to continue to press that point before even, I think, engaging with the idea of putting US troops in Ukraine or U.S. planes or anything like this. So I think, in practical terms, he's going to be briefed by everybody, both in D.C. and the embassy here, about what Starmer's been up to, how is he positioning himself ahead of this. So he's going to know, and he's going to treat it as a negotiation. He's going to try and get defense spending up because that is what he cares about in the UK.
What do you think he could give away? It's interesting that, or if anything, because Keir Starmer has been asking all sorts of questions and raising the spectre of things like a backstop, a form of military backup system, essentially, when it comes to Ukraine and what Britain and France want to do there.
Yeah, I think President Trump is going to be instinctively opposed to a backstop because ultimately they are Starmer and Macron are asking for an American military presence in Ukraine, and that is President Trump. He is consistent. He's been consistently against that idea. So I think in order to get that, if they were going to press that point, there has to be more of an ask. Like Macron coming over and fact checking and saying you're making a mistake, I don't think that's necessarily the right move. I think Starmer's done it a bit better in the sense of, he's announced an increase. He's talking about investment into the U.S. from big British tech companies, stuff like that. Like, that's great. But ultimately, then it's like, what's in it for President Trump and his foreign policy agenda for putting American hard power in Ukraine? And so far, I don't think Starmer has done a good enough job of answering that, because in President Trump's mind, this is a European problem, not an American problem.
Yes, and I would imagine there are many members of his administration and even Democrats who believe that as well. I wonder how seriously Keir Starmer will be taken, because we've had this shuttle diplomacy, this conveyor belt of leaders from Europe. You've had Macron earlier this week, a number of calls between Macron and Starmer. They've planned a meeting of various leaders next week. We know as well that Zelensky is coming tomorrow. Surely that's the main event this week, more so than the UK Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think Zelensky is. I think that's going to be the big negotiation, right? Because I think President Trump has been clear that I think he wants American companies to have access to Ukrainian markets post ceasefire, and he's framing it as a form of economic deterrence. And I think there's merit in that argument, in the sense of, imagine his bulldog in chief, Elon Musk, opens up a Tesla factory in Ukraine. I imagine Russia might think twice before bombing a Tesla factory, for example.
And this whole idea, I mean, it's a very, very interesting point, and this whole idea of what security guarantees actually are, my impression of that, and you're the expert, Michael, but my impression of that is that that can be a much more fluid concept than simply saying, right, it's boots on the ground, or it's drones in the air, or it's spy planes.
Yeah, I think from President Trump's perspective, it's hard. It'll be difficult to commit to those things because, in many ways, the deal hasn't been done on any side. And I actually think it's important that Zelensky is going because Putin is also trying to offer mineral deals to the U.S. in a way that would undermine Ukrainian sovereignty. These are minerals that are in Russian occupied but Ukrainian territory, right? So I think it's important that Zelensky is going ahead of Putin, and that at least Trump's approach, his negotiation tactic, although consistent of like aiming for the stars, maybe landing on a cloud for him, but it is softening. Like there is the softening away of the 500 billion and this, and now it's more about like, okay, how do we get American access into Ukrainian markets? And I think as that dialogue progresses and as the tone changes, there is going to be scope here for Ukrainian and European wins. It's just a matter of like threading that needle. Because in my opinion, actually Russia doesn't have a plan B. Like Putin's been waiting 4 years for President Trump to come to power. So if Europe and Zelensky and everybody play this well and end up getting, kind of what they want or something like this, then the biggest person that Trump has leverage over, in my mind right now, is actually Putin. And I think Stramer would do well to like press that point home.
That's very, very interesting. What kind of leverage do you think he would enact? How do you think Putin would dance to his tune? Because that is not an aspect that really so much of the Western security and I suppose media establishment really think would be the case. It's more to do with this idea of Trump sort of doing what Putin tells him to do, but actually it could well be the other way around.
If you think about it, Putin has staked a lot on the idea of Trump's return, right? And the idea that President Trump would kind of do what he's doing now, right? But in practical terms, that gives President Trump a lot of leverage over Putin. So I think if you're Stramer and you press that point home, in some ways it's almost like it's like bait. Like you can get President Trump, I think, to at least understand that he understands leverage clearly. And I think it was the former head of MI6 that made this point a few weeks ago that I thought was really interesting, because it's like you have this unique moment, and we're all focusing on the Zelensky angle and the European angle, but I also think there's the Russian angle, because if you look at the rhetoric coming out of Russia and Putin right now, it's much more docile. It's almost absent in some ways, which is very different than before when it was President Biden, where it was much more combative, saber rattling. Now I think they're trying they're kind of walking on eggshells because they don't want the attention.
Yeah, it's fascinating actually in regard to that. I should say we are moments away, where we think anyway. There are lots of people with flags. I think that's the flag of Maryland, if I remember correctly. That is
the wire, right?
That is on the front. I used to live in Maryland, so I think that is correct. At the foreground of the shot there, we see some different photographers there as well. We've got the Stars and Stripes, the US flag, of course, and the Union flag there. Keir Starmer is about 15 minutes late. I imagine he is coming from the British Embassy or from the Great House, which is where the UK ambassador Lord Mandelson now lives, the residence there. He will be coming to the White House for these discussions with Donald Trump. We are on air now and will be for that arrival, and Michael Martins is with me. He's a former political specialist at the US Embassy in London. I wonder, Michael, what your thoughts are in regard to the differences. I know you worked for the embassy during the first Trump administration. What are your impressions of the second Trump administration and how it's been, 35 days now, how different it is from the first one?
Excellent. Great question, Peter. I think instinctively, I don't think the instincts have changed. The big difference is organization and loyalty. I think he has a lot more loyalists and that are capable around him, and they have a clear agenda of what they want to do. And it's as weird as it sounds, it's less chaotic than his first term. It's clear that, you know, they had executive orders lined up, they had nominees lined up, they knew what they wanted. And that is, you know, his first term, it was almost like a surprise in some ways. It felt like it. And that was much more chaotic. And I think he was also trying to bring a bit more legitimacy into his first term by, you know, if you remember the rotating cast of generals and that type of thing, like,
yes.
Remarkably, it's been over a month and he hasn't fired anyone. Like, I think that's different than his first term.
Yes, well, certainly Anthony Scaramucci, he lasted, what, 11 days or something along those lines?
It lasted longer than it takes to, like, upload a video on YouTube.
Certainly in 2016 anyway. It's interesting with those characters. I mean, we do have, there's some, especially in Ukraine, there are some aspects of this where there are different people saying different things. Pete Hegseth, for example, the US Defense Secretary, saying slightly different things from Keith Kellogg, the general who's the special envoy to Ukraine. Even Trump himself saying initially that he didn't think that Zelensky would be part of the discussions, then saying it's important that Zelensky actually sits down and talks with Putin. From someone who worked in the US Embassy, how difficult was that actually to navigate when you had contradictory things coming out of the senior people?
Yeah, it definitely kept us on our toes. I think in many ways, because a lot of the harder parts of it would be when we were engaging with our counterparts in the British government. And, you know, the British civil service is a very professional and capable place. They were kind when we had some of our talking points mid-meeting.
Sorry to interrupt you, Michael. I think it's just fair to say that President Donald Trump is now at the front door of the White House. There is a Marine who is saluting there, and we expect Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, to be there very, very soon indeed. We know that he is going to be greeted there by the President, Donald Trump. That is not something that always happens. We can see what the Americans call a motorcade, where there is a long limousine that has both American flags, the Stars and Stripes, and the UK flag there. And Keir Starmer has just arrived and he is shaking the hands of President Trump. The two men are greeting each other warmly. They are smiling. They are gesturing toward.
Can you get a peace deal done in Ukraine? Yes. How confident are you, sir?
So there was a question, they're just going inside the White House now, and there was a question from a reporter there asking, can you get a peace deal done in Ukraine? And President Trump appeared, from what I heard and what I saw, for him to say, yes, I believe we can. That's certainly consistent with everything else he said previously. And they have now gone inside the White House. They will have a series of meetings there. There'll be a press conference, a lot of discussion, of course, over the next few hours. Michael Martins was joining me there. We're going to say thank you to him. He is a former political specialist at the US Embassy in London. And Sir Keir Starmer, now inside the White House, will bring you all that we can, of course, including probably a press conference around 7 o'clock, and we're in a second. We're actually going to come back to UK political affairs and speak to Stuart Andrew, who is the Shadow Culture Secretary. So stay with us for that here on Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, let's go straight to Stuart Andrew, who is the Shadow Culture Secretary. Stuart, apologies for keeping you waiting there. A small matter of the leader of the free world being involved, but thank you so much for your patience. Really appreciate that. That's Stuart Andrew, who is a Conservative for Daventry and also the Shadow Culture Secretary. I want to ask you specifically about this Gary Lineker controversy and the BBC, but can I just get a quick answer from you first, Stuart, perhaps, on the fact that the Prime Minister is meeting the President. What do you want to get out of? What do you think he should try to get out of that meeting?
Well, look, first of all, I wish him the very best. You know, he is the British Prime Minister. I hope that he has really successful talks with the President of the United States, and I hope that he can articulate to the President that there is a united position here in the United Kingdom, that we stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of Ukraine, and that, yes, we want peace, but we want to make sure that Ukraine has a say in its future. After all, it is a proud, independent country, and it should have that opportunity to be at those talks. And I'm sure the Prime Minister will be making that point during his meeting, and we wish him well whilst he does so.
There's clearly a difference of opinion between your party leader, Kemi Badenoch, and Keir Starmer in regard to the Chagos Islands. What should Keir Starmer try to get out of Donald Trump in that regard as well?
Well, you're right. I mean, we are very worried about the position that the government have taken on the Chagos Islands, and that's why we ensured we had a debate in Parliament about it yesterday. You know, there's so many unanswered questions. We want to know exactly how much this is going to cost, and where is that money coming from? Is it from this increased spending on defence that was announced, which we welcome, but also making sure that we're not throwing away British assets. That is something that I think we feel very strongly about, and it will be interesting to see what at the conclusion of these talks today, whether or not that issue came up and what the views are of the Americans. And, you know, we wait with bated breath to hear that.
Let's talk about the BBC. You're the Shadow Culture Secretary, Stuart, and Gary Lineker, as well as about 650 other media figures, have criticised the BBC for pulling a documentary on Gaza. It is called Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone. Numerous controversies around it, including that the narrator and one of the characters in it was not disclosed, is the son of a Hamas terrorist figure. We also know that one of the cameramen was apparently celebrating the 7th of October massacres. It's interesting, the people who are objecting to this have written to people like Deborah Turness, of course, who is the chief executive of BBC News. They say the documentary is an essential piece of journalism. They say it offers an all too rare perspective on the lived experience of Palestinian children living in unimaginable circumstances, which amplifies voices so often silenced. It deserves recognition, not politically motivated censorship. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm afraid I disagree, because what we have seen here was, first of all, that was the line that we got from the BBC, that this was a valuable insight. And let me say right from the outset, this is a really sensitive issue, and it is important that in really sensitive and challenging circumstances like this, that we can have faith in our public sector broadcasting. That, you know, the BBC is our national broadcaster.
Do you have faith in the BBC? Do you have faith in the BBC to tell the truth impartially and to give licence fee payers the value they deserve?
But on the whole, yes, they do. But there are some instances, and this is one of them, where we have some real concerns. It was, first of all, described as a valuable insight into the life of what people have been experiencing in Gaza. It was only after there was an outcry, because there was a realization that the son featured in that was the son of an official within Hamas, and it was then pulled. More has come out since, such as the sort of translation that was used. So, you know, sort of some of the terms that we used by those being interviewed was translated into something slightly different. And
instead of Jews, it said Israelis, for example. It deleted the word jihad, for example. There was definitely a toning down in regard to some of the translation and the subtitles there.
And that's exactly the point. And what we want to ensure is that when there are these broadcasts coming out, that we can have faith that they are factual broadcasts, they're independent, and they are giving a factual account of what is happening. When you have questions like we've had with this, it does bring into question, how did this happen? What checks and balances did the BBC have? And I have to say, I was grateful to the Secretary of State today in the urgent question we had for being robust and for saying that she has absolutely challenged the BBC on this. We're waiting to hear what the investigation concludes.
Yes, we know that there's a meeting this afternoon that Deborah Turness, who's the Chief Executive of BBC News, is going to brief the board of the BBC. That will, of course, also be attended by the Director General, Tim Davie, and Samir Shah, who's the Chairman of the BBC. What do you think should happen now, and should this documentary ever be shown again?
Well, the point being, we want to have the answers. We want to know how was this commissioned? What checks and balances were taken? Given that this is such a sensitive area of broadcasting, we want to know the questions that we have put. How was this commissioned? What checks were made in terms of ensuring that the people that are part of it are not directly related or linked to Hamas, who are a prescribed terrorist organization in this country? And we want to know, was public money used in any way that would have helped or benefited Hamas? Once we know what the answers to those questions are, and also, how is it that something as basic, I would say, as getting translation right has been missed? How has all of that happened? Once we see the answers to that, I think that will then help us to understand what it is we expect to see in terms of action from that programme, but also to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And so that when we do watch these programmes, when we do see these reports, we can have confidence that they are properly produced, that the translation is accurate, and that there is a proper opportunity for us to hear directly from people not associated with terrorist organisations.
We know, and you know far better than I do as Shadow Culture Secretary, that the BBC has obfuscated on a number of investigations that they have had. Hugh Edwards is one of them, Russell Brand is another. On Monday it will be 19 months since the BBC announced an investigation into what Russell Brand did or didn't do, and we still don't know what Peter Johnson, who's the executive looking into that, thinks about all that. It takes a very, very long time. I wonder how confident you are that these answers will be made public, you will get the answers that you want, that the public will get, and licence fee payers will get the answers that they want, and something like this can't happen again.
Well, I think you're right to highlight that, and actually the chair of the Select Committee made that very point in the chamber today. She made the point that this is, another example. To be fair to the Secretary of State, she made it very clear that she would update the House as soon as she heard more information from the BBC. She said that she was going to regularly keep in touch with this. I appreciate that. Because it means that we are all saying the same thing. We need to have confidence. The BBC has the privilege of being one of the sort of main broadcaster for the UK, if you like, and it is important that we have confidence in it. And so, waiting for those answers is going to be critical. And once we get them, we'll understand then what action needs to be taken, and that is when we will have further discussions with the government about, what we need to do to ensure that we can have that confidence in the production of these reports.
Stuart Andrew, thank you. Stuart is the Shadow Culture Secretary. He's also the Conservative MP for Daventry. I appreciate that. I appreciate your patience as well today with our breaking news story a little bit earlier on. So thank you for that, Stuart. Leslie says, hi Peter, I'm sorry to say, as a patriotic Brit, I was embarrassed seeing David Lammy following Stramer into the White House, Foreign Secretary, and the Prime Minister, and many others, of course, in the White House with President Trump at the moment. Graham in Bushy says maybe Stramer will tell Trump how to smash the gangs and build the foundations. Jane says that's a good start, keeping the president waiting. And Brian in Hayes says today's meeting between President Trump and Sir Keir will be like Arnold Schwarzenegger meeting Frank Spencer. Ooh, Betty. Rob says if you talk to anyone in Gaza, you will be talking to someone who either supports Hamas or is part of Hamas. In both instances, they will be linked to a terrorist organisation. So why did the BBC do a a programme featuring terrorists funded by the licence fee. Rob, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you. I don't think everybody in Gaza supports Hamas. I think a lot of them are threatened and cajoled into doing so. It's hard to get an answer in regard to this, and we see an awful lot of people who do support Hamas, people clapping, cheering, bringing their children to those horrendous hostage handovers. They're so dreadful, the handovers of some of those bodies, more of which happened today. But I don't think you can say that everybody in Gaza supports Hamas. I just don't think that's true. And I know there have been many innocent civilians and innocent people who want nothing that Hamas wants to happen and doesn't want them to be in control, to actually be in control. And they want a peaceful time. Now, there are many people who do support Hamas, but I think just saying everybody in Gaza supports Hamas, I think that's just not true, in the same way as, we think of numerous conflict zones and we sort of assume that the public supports them. There's certainly many members of the public in Gaza who do support Hamas. There's no doubt about that. And if you want to get ahead in the society, you've got to do what Hamas say. But there are some people who, perhaps quietly, for obvious reasons, don't support Hamas. So I sort of respectfully disagree with you there, Rob. Andy in Cornwall says, will the BBC make Afghanistan pay for the TV licenses that broadcast in their country? Do you know what? I didn't even ask Stuart Andrew about that because there's so many other people, so many other issues to ask him about. We'll talk about the BBC in a minute. Lots of calls coming in about that and about Trump as well. Stay with us here on Talk.
Earlier this week, after he pleaded guilty to assault, a drunken, repeated, vicious punching of a constituent, his Runcorn constituency, he was sentenced to 10 weeks, but it's been now, after an appeal at Chester Crown Court, suspended for 2 years. He very likely will still face that recall petition, and a by-election is likely to be called, but not a day behind, well, not more than a couple of days behind bars for punching someone. Two-tier justice, anybody? God forbid he'd written a hurty tweet to the constituent rather than punched him. He'd probably still be behind bars for 20 years.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Craig is in Oxford and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Craig, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Yeah, good afternoon. Yeah, I've had my fill of the Bias Broadcasting Corporation now. I can't believe them. The last straw with this documentary for me today. So I phoned up, cancelled the TV licence, and had to listen to their scaremongering and fearmongering and a massive long list of reasons why I have to have a TV license.
Well, what did they say? What did they say to you? This was to the TV licensing authority. You were ringing them today?
Yeah, why are you still watching live TV? No. Or what do you watch on TV? I said streaming services. Or do you watch Netflix? Yeah. Do you watch live broadcast events on Netflix? No. Okay. Do you go on YouTube? Yeah. Do you watch live stuff on YouTube? I said, if it is, it's on a tablet or a phone, not necessarily in the house.
Yeah.
Oh, well, if you watch streaming on YouTube, you need a license.
Right.
So, don't give me that nonsense. I said, stop trying to scare people into keeping stuff they don't need and funding a shameful service.
Why do you think it's a shameful service? Why do you think the BBC is a shameful service, Greg?
You can't trust anything they say. Everything they say is biased. It's left leaning. There's no kind of impartiality in there. I mean, I used to love a series. I only did 2 seasons of it called The Newsroom with
Jeff Daniels and
yeah, absolutely amazing series about impartial, unbiased news, and which is why I listen to you guys and GB, whatever it is, because you actually get some impartiality, and they're not trying to, tilt what you're hearing and sway your opinion.
And you clearly feel the BBC does that. What about other broadcasters, Sky, ITV, and so on? Do you feel they're all part of one and the same, or do you feel that they're perhaps different?
So Sky seems to be marginally better. I think ITV are probably worse. I don't really watch. I don't watch much live TV because there's nothing on offer. It's all garbage. It's all reality TV
and actually,
nonsense.
you've got to, if you're paying for Netflix and so on, you're actually paying probably more than the license fee for that anyway. And there are people with Sky subscriptions and so on. I mean, they're paying quite a lot for television, and the license fee is just another element of that, isn't it?
Exactly. I think Netflix is 18 quid a month now, and I've just had an email saying it's going up by 2 or 3 quid.
Right.
So
I'm a cheapskate. I got the one with ads, so that costs a bit less, I think. But Craig, really interesting to talk to you today, and thanks for your thoughts. That's Craig in Oxford there. Gemma in Staffordshire is our next caller. Gemma, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Good afternoon, Peter.
Hi there.
I'm just going to come at it from the one angle, because otherwise, we'll all end up saying the same things as one another. I am looking at this BBC thing from the eyes of that child, and I feel so sorry for him. Now, I don't mean that I think he's a perfect child or his father is this and that. I just can't believe that a child is in the centre of this, because the BBC have supposed to have a good reputation, and day by day it is getting worse, their reputation. And this particular incident thing is a child, and that for me is just so wrong that they've got this wrong. I quite want to see it. I do want to see it now, but I can't because they've taken it off.
Yeah.
That's what I think should put it back on, with a proviso in front saying, look.
So you do think we should be able to see it then?
Well, in a sense, because I can't judge on it now because I can't see it. I've not only seen the clips of it that you've shown and other to people. I presume that's all the same clips that get sent out, is it?
Yeah.
We've only seen the clips, and I've heard commentary about different types of shoes and different lengths of hair. I can't even work out from the clips whether it's one child.
You'd like to decide for yourself. With all the information that is in the public domain now, with all the caveats and so on, I mean, we now know an awful lot more about this documentary than we did 2 weeks ago. Do you think people should be able to make up their own mind now? Or are you, I suppose the question I'm asking, Gemma, is do you think by watching that documentary, with all the extra information that's in the public domain now, that we will actually get a true sense of what it was really about?
I think we will get a better idea of what they want us to think is happening.
Okay.
But the child is now, his eyes will have been changed, so they need to go back and speak to that child, because that child who supposedly is narrating and being mistranslated will probably feel very differently, and maybe even his father, about because it's been misinterpreted now, and it's not so good for the child, the father, Gaza, Palestine, or Israel, or the BBC.
Okay. Gemma, thanks for your opinion on that. Really interesting. I hadn't heard quite that perspective before. Always good. I love this job because you hear all sorts of perspectives, including Gemma's. Bill says, the first question Trump should ask is, do you know what a woman is? Dawn in Chelmsford says, I feel almost sorry for President Trump having to meet Mandelson, Lammy and Starmer at the same time. It demonstrates how poor our politicians are now. Brian in Sheffield says, Starmer looked very much like a rabbit caught in the headlights meeting Trump. I wonder what he will say wrong to embarrass us as a nation this time. Great show, Cardi P, says Brian in Sheffield. Brian, thank you. Jules has been in touch from Bedford. Jules, what would you like to say about the BBC?
Hi, thanks for having me on, Peter. I was just realising that actually the great danger with the BBC is conversely like The Guardian. If you pick up The Guardian, you know you're going to get a left-leaning slant.
Yeah.
If you pick up The Telegraph, it's going to be a right-leaning slant.
Yeah.
I read both of those because I like to be informed, but I know what I'm getting each time.
Sure.
The BBC will swear on their mothers' lives that they are impartial, and they will try and persuade people that they have no bias. Whereas anybody capable of critical thought can see that there's a bias. Unfortunately, most people don't spot it. So most people think that the BBC portray the world is the world as it actually is.
Is true impartiality ever really possible, Jules?
No, I don't think it is, but I think it should be. I think they should be open about the fact, rather than continue to try and pretend that something is one thing when it's not. I mean, you just have to look at their climate coverage as a classic example. They didn't even try and be impartial, but they'll tell you they are. They'll tell you they're being factual.
Yeah.
You see, so that is the danger. I'm not expecting you to be impartial, Peter. You can come at things with a right-leaning slant. I know that's what I'm getting. Sure. I can agree or I can disagree, but you're not lying to me about where you're coming from. That's the difference.
Thank you, Jules. Very, very interesting perspective, Jules in Bedford there. Some breaking news now, and as we largely expected, the US President Donald Trump, he's been invited for an unprecedented second state visit. That is by the King. Keir Starmer has confirmed that. That is, Donald Trump has been invited to the United Kingdom for an unprecedented second state visit. Also, we are being told that the Union flag was hung the wrong way up outside Starmer's quarters, and that is traditionally used as a coded distress signal and maybe viewed as a bad omen by superstitious observers. We'll bring you a bit more on that as time goes on. Let's see if we can quickly put in Richie from Essex. Richie, we've got about 1 minute before the news. What would you like to say?
Yeah, hello, Peter. How you doing?
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, so not last week, the week before, I actually had a TV licence officer knock at my door.
Okay.
He was very polite. I knew who he was because he was standing with a tablet at my door. He asked me why I cancelled my TV licence. I told him because of obviously issues with Hugh Edwards, etc., etc. Everyone knows. He asked if I watched live TV. I said, not really. I said, there's not much on the BBC that I like. I said, I did watch Amazon. He said, well, you do need a TV licence for that. He actually said, because of the football opportunity they show. I said, well, I'm still not going to pay it. I said, because until they can prove to me...
Well, were you watching the football, Richie?
Well, I've got an Amazon. Because I've got the Amazon and I watch Amazon, I have potentially watched football on there. But he did then say to me, he asked me if I was, he asked me why I cancelled it. I told him why. I said, I'm not going to fund a corporation. But then he did then say to me, and this is God's honest truth, he said he'll cancel my TV licence for a year and we'll reassess it in a year's time.
Okay, thanks, Richie. Thanks very much.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company today, and indeed tomorrow we'll be here between 4 and 7 on Saturday and Sunday from 10 a.m. as well. Lots to discuss at this exact moment. The Prime Minister Keir Starmer is in the White House. He is talking to President Trump, and we know that Donald Trump has been invited for an unprecedented second state visit by the King. That is the breaking news this hour. We also know that the Israeli army admits it completely failed with minimum border security on the 7th of October attack. This is an inquiry which is the result of tens of thousands of hours of work by the IDF Southern Command. Found as many as 5,600 terrorists broke into Israel in 3 waves on the 7th of October. We'll get analysis on that in just a few minutes' time. I want your thoughts as well, not just on what's happening in America, but also Israel and here in the UK too. We'll talk as well about every driver's personal information to be made available to the police. That's happening this hour. 0344 499 1000 is the main number to call. You can do a number of things with that. You can give me a ring for a live discussion on the air. You can send me a voice note via WhatsApp, or you can send me a WhatsApp text message on 0344 499 1000. You can also text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. Lots to discuss between now and 7 o'clock when we expect a press conference from the White House. That will be part of Kevin O'Sullivan's programme here on Talk. Well, let's get straight into what is happening stateside. It is about lunchtime, just gone 1 o'clock. Of course, the White House in Washington, D.C., where I used to live actually, is 5 hours behind us. We know that Donald Trump has been invited for an unprecedented second state visit by the King. That is now clear. We have a little bit more information coming out as well, and that the Union flag was hung the wrong way upside down outside Blair House. Now, Blair House is the sort of presidential guest house opposite the White House where leaders stay, international leaders stay. So Keir Starmer was staying there, and hanging the flag the wrong way is traditionally used as a coded distress signal. But listen, I'm sure Keir Starmer is cool as a cucumber as he's going into perhaps the biggest meeting of his life in the White House. We know there's going to be a lunch as well between senior people, not just Starmer and Trump, but also senior people, their advisors and so on as well. There's lots to discuss, certainly in regard to Ukraine, Russia, what happens then. So let's get into this with Tom Del Beccaro. He is a former chairman of the California Republican Party. Tom, thank you for joining me. It's about half an hour now since Keir Starmer has entered the White House. There's a lot at stake for us here in the United Kingdom. From an American perspective, how big a deal do you think this is for Donald Trump? How much do you think he will try to extract from this series of meetings?
Well, look, the whole world is being reset in a sense, and I think ultimately at the other end of this, it could be a much better NATO. It could be a much better agreement between the U.S. and the U.K. and even the U.S. and France. The reality is that Putin did a horrible thing. He is a dictator. He did start the war, and he does need to be deterred. I think your prime minister did an amazing thing. We recall the troubles that Tony Blair had related to Iraq. So for your prime minister to come out and say that he is willing to provide the assistance in Ukraine to back up what I think he's going to advocate for a U.S. presence, which has to be. So as his currently being there in the position he's taking, I think is the right position and rather brave considering his political situation.
And it's interesting because Donald Trump really holds an awful lot of the cards here, especially when it comes to the negotiations with Russia, the security situation in Ukraine. Keir Starmer, clearly the junior partner.
Yes, that may well be true. And let's face it, the United States has the weapons, has the budget, and all of those things. We all get that. But at the end of the day, this is not going to be a situation. Historians will look back at that and say this isn't a situation where Putin gave up land. I think what needs to happen is, and I don't, certainly not the UN won't be there, and probably not NATO forces, or almost certainly. So what does that mean? That means an alliance of the willing has to be there. The U.S. will have an economic deal there, and if France and UK put personnel there along with U.S. personnel, that provides the deterrence in the short term. And I define the short term as for however long Putin remains alive. And then in the years following that, you have this opportunity to bring Ukraine into NATO, because hopefully Russia has changed with the death of Putin.
Well, you say hopefully. I wonder whether what comes after Putin would necessarily be any better. But you touch on an area. Right. You touch on an area there, Tom, which I'd love to get into, which is this whole idea of security guarantees. I've been asking some of my guests throughout this programme on that, and my thought, and I just wonder what your perspective is as a Republican. I wonder how much of a security guarantee is actually a very tangible thing, such as planes in the air, spy drones, whether it's security, cyber backup, or whether it's actually saying, look, if we have this huge mineral deal, for example, with $500 billion, coming towards the United States, well, surely, or Elon Musk sets up a Tesla factory in Kyiv, for example, surely that by itself has some form of security guarantee, because it is within the interests of the United States for whatever the peace deal that is is agreed, that is sustained and that is reinforced.
If you look at the last 80 years of U.S. Foreign affairs and where troops have been and not been, we look back at when we said that South Korea was outside our sphere of influence, or we wouldn't provide deterrence there, and the war started immediately. Ever since then, not immediately, but shortly thereafter, ever since then, U.S. presence to one degree or another, you look at the demilitarized zone, South Korea, North Korea, or bases abroad, has provided that. This might well be a hybrid. The fact that the U.S. gets closer economically means that U.S. personnel will be on the ground. The fact that the U.S. needs these rare earth minerals means that personnel will be on the ground. It has to be a physical presence when it comes to Putin. It cannot simply be, we'll give you arms, because we had been giving them arms. Under Obama, he only gave blankets. How good did that work? So it will have to be some type of physical presence. That's what the last 80 years have taught us with respect to China, frankly, and the then Soviet Union and now Russia.
But when you have even Democrats shying away from that and perhaps agreeing to some degree with President Trump, it'll be fascinating to see how this actually plays out. How do you expect it to play out?
I think they do sign an economic deal. I do think the U.S. puts civilians there in the short term. If it and by creating how close this relationship develops, that will be in part deterrence. I also expect the UK and France and maybe others to do a similar thing and provide a de facto NATO presence, even though NATO isn't technically there, meaning there's no way Putin's going to go invade a country and start a war within miles of Americans.
No, it's a very interesting point there. The Chagos Islands, that is a huge issue here, certainly for our viewers and listeners here on Talk. And I wonder, I mean, I would imagine for the American public, it's not nearly as big an issue, but for the Trump administration, I wonder, especially with the security aspect of Diego Garcia, one of the Chagos Islands, how big an issue it is or indeed should be in your estimation.
Well, we know the United States has the most bases of any country or in the world by far. But we also know that China is physically aggressive in the sense of where they put people, where they put investments, and they would like to expand. Quite frankly, Diego Garcia is essential long-term for the U.S. So I simply, given where it is as it relates to China, Taiwan, and the rest of Southeast Asia. So the chances that Trump is going to give up a U.S. base in that area are zero. Nor does he want to spend extra money along the way because he's all about cost cutting. So I don't see it possible for the U.S. to withdraw in that respect, or desire that. So I think he's going to lean very hard on your prime minister not to do that.
We've heard as well today, the breaking news really in the last sort of 15 minutes or so, is that President Donald Trump is going to be invited to the UK for an unprecedented second state visit. How important will that be to him personally, but also to the United States? It's a huge honour.
It is, and let's keep in mind that the UK and Israel are the United States' two closest allies and exceptionally important. And this is exceptionally important to Trump because the more allies talk, the closer they get, the better for the whole world. And the fact that he has met with so many, and this second visit is critical in the sense that it shows the world that we're in a new administration. And in fact, there is this camaraderie. You didn't see that the last 4 years for physical and let's face it, mental health reasons, but you're seeing it now, and talking is a good thing. I'm so old, I remember when the Democrats thought talking to our allies and our enemies was a good thing. Trump's doing it, so therefore it's not a good thing in some respects. But I think this demonstrates that we're in an era of cooperation different than what most people think, which most Democrats in the United States think, which is Trump is doing everything himself.
Yeah,
I will say this. I think it's interesting if he meets the king, because Trump is going one way on climate, and we know what the king feels about that. So I'm wondering where that discussion goes. I'd like to be a fly in the wall for that moment.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Really interesting to talk to you. That is Tom Del Beccaro, who is a former chairman of the California Republican Party. It is absolutely fascinating, really, when you think about what is going on in the White House at the moment. There's a lunch. We know at the moment there's going to be a press conference a little bit later on Kevin O'Sullivan's show. He's on between 7 and 10 this evening. He's back on the radio tonight from 7. No football. He will bring you the live press conference with Trump and Stramer. Should be around 7 o'clock, but we know, I mean, the arrival was delayed by 15 minutes, and often these things take longer than we think they're going to. In fact, when President Clinton was president in the 90s, they called it Clinton time. He almost had his own time zone, and actually some of Kemi Badenoch's people say she has her own time zone because she's often not on time. So these things always slip a little bit, but Kevin O'Sullivan will be here between 7 and 10. I'm back tomorrow between 4 and 7, and indeed at the weekend in the mornings from 10 o'clock. And no doubt there will be a lot of analysis of what was discussed, what wasn't discussed, what Keir Starmer got and indeed didn't get. Let's talk to Georgina in London. She has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Georgina, what's your impression of what they should be talking about and what Keir Starmer is likely to get out of this meeting?
Well, I personally think, I mean, everybody's talking about Russia and Ukraine, and quite rightly so, but I think President Trump on this issue wants the fighting to stop. He wants the killing to stop. He wants it finished, and I'm with him on that. But I think the most important thing that will be on President Trump's mind is the giving away of the Chagos Islands. What you've got to remember is one of the most prevalent and important bases is on those islands. It's a sovereign island, you know. So if Keir Starmer gives away those islands, he's giving away basically the defences for the United States of America.
There's a big American element to that, as well as a UK element, as you correctly say, Georgina. No doubt that will be part of the discussion. We'll see how much information we get from that. Georgina, thank you. That's Georgina in London. We're going to talk in a second just about a breaking story this afternoon, and that is that the Israeli army, the IDF, Israeli Defence Force, admits it completely failed with minimum border security in the 7th of October attack. Now, there's no doubt that Hamas is responsible for those horrendous attacks, but the Israeli army themselves saying that so much more could have been done. We'll get into that in just a minute here on Talk.
Earlier this week, after he pleaded guilty to assault, a drunken, repeated, vicious punching of a constituent. His Runcorn constituency, he was sentenced to 10 weeks, but it's been now, after an appeal at Chester Crown Court, suspended for 2 years. He very likely will still face that recall petition, and a by-election is likely to be called, but not a day behind, well, more than a couple of days behind bars for punching someone. Two-tier justice, anybody? God forbid he'd written a hurty tweet to the constituent rather than punched him. He'd probably still be behind bars for 20 years.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
So the 7th of October 2023, as many people will know, was an absolutely horrendous day for Israel. It was its darkest day, really, for Jewish people around the world since the Holocaust. We know that 1,400 or so people were murdered by Hamas terrorists. We know that many more were injured, hostages that are still being held over 500 days later in the tunnels beneath Gaza. But what led to this? We know, of course, that Hamas terrorists are guilty of actually carrying out the attacks. But were there intelligence failures? What did the Israeli army do and not do? Well, now there is a huge inquiry, which is the result of tens of thousands of hours of work by the IDF's Southern Command. The IDF, of course, the Israeli Defence Forces, found as many as 5,600 terrorists, Hamas terrorists, broke into Israel in 3 different waves. It has now been called by the Israeli Defence Forces itself a complete failure of Israeli security and the result of many years of planning and deception by Hamas. The Israeli military said the IDF failed in its mission to protect people, and it was one of the greatest failures in the military's history. We know that on the 7th of October, 4,694 mortars and rockets were fired from Gaza into Israel, and we know that around 1,400 people were murdered and over 250 taken hostage. Now, the IDF battled to regain control of the southern Israel the same day. Some of its commanders were forced to use Google Maps and mobile phones to communicate and coordinate. Clearly, one of the most advanced, well-funded and, in military terms anyway, certainly admired military forces in the world failed, and by their own admission, they failed. Well, let's talk to Sean Bell now. He's a former fighter pilot. He's now a military analyst. Sean, this is a big admission, and it comes after a very, very long period of reflection and investigation by the IDF as well.
Yeah, good evening, Peter. I mean, self-evidently, this was an Israeli failure. I mean, after all, even by their own admission, they've done over 10,000 hours of work into this. And as you say, you go through the statistics, over 5,600 Hamas fighters and their allies made their way into Israel that fateful day in 3 waves. And by any admission, the Israelis would have to admit to some sort of failure. I think what part of this, though, is a cleansing process to try and work out how on earth you avoid this sort of thing happening again. And as a military guy, I have to say, the one thing that Hamas had was the element of surprise. It's pretty evident from the report that Yahya Sinwar, the then boss of Hamas, had been planning this since November of 2016. I mean, 8 years of planning. They were watching carefully, learning what the Israeli responses were. And I think that's one of the problems of these asymmetric attacks. You get so much time of planning. Hamas was never going to win, but my goodness, did they make a fateful blow on the 7th of October?
Well, surely there must be questions for the Mossad as well in regard to if there were 8 years of planning, surely there should have been intelligence that they should have gotten all of this. I'm sure there are many Israelis today and other people right around the world who are very angry with the response, and we know that there have been all these allegations around for a long time. I mean, how do you think this went so wrong?
Well, the trouble is, like all these things, Israel has got a very, very effective military. They have a conscription mechanism. A load of people have lots of experience, and they do regular patrols. There's lots going on. The trouble is, when you have a determined enemy, as you do with Hamas, who is prepared to lose a lot of lives themselves on these sorts of attacks, it's very difficult to maintain that edge. And it's also true that the Israelis were distracted by Hezbollah to the north and also Iran. And at the time, they thought that Hamas probably wouldn't be in a fit state to conduct these operations. How wrong they were. But I do think we've got to not only, and luckily Israel would do lots of self-reflection in this, but I would give a lot of credit to Hamas. This was very, very carefully planned. They were able to take advantage of Israeli sort of complacency. And I think you have to look back to our own country. We are facing war of national survival now with Russia invading on the European continent, and yet we're still questioning whether to spend the money on defense. So in that context, it's no great surprise that Israel took their eye off the ball for this period, and they will definitely learn. They will not make these mistakes again.
But that point on defence spending is an interesting one, because you have Israel, which spends a huge amount on defence. As you say, it has conscripts within the army, and still they failed to spot this. They failed to realise that this was coming. And from their perspective, some might say, well, it doesn't really matter how much you spend on defence if you have a dedicated, asymmetric terrorist group in Hamas that is going to do this. They're going to do it anyway. So actually, why give more money to defence spending?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I do think when you have a determined enemy, they're going to find a way. I mean, without going through a history lesson, there's a lot of defences on the Israeli side of Gaza, some of them subterranean. But of course, they never expected Hezbollah to have a go with the sort of numbers they did. And I think that's part of, if you're going to have a go at your enemy, and he's much bigger than you, go for the weaknesses. And that's what Hezbollah spent years and years planning. I do think, these days, it's one thing to have
Hamas in Gaza, wasn't it? You're talking about Hezbollah in the north, are you?
No, I'm talking about Hezbollah. Literally, when Hamas came in from Gaza, there were all sorts of defences established there, but they just never expected Hamas to come across the border in the sort of numbers they did.
Sure.
And I think that's part of deception is such a key part of military planning that wars have been littered with this, and you catch your enemy by surprise and you inflict a mortal blow on him. I think that it doesn't matter how much money you spend. Ultimately, defence is a human endeavour as well. And part of that is, how do you avoid complacency? And I think before we shine too many lights on Israel for this, you only have to look at our own government and our own approach to defense. We have got a lot of blind spots. We've got a lot of areas where we haven't got defense capability. We would be shocked to an asymmetry attack. We just believe that it's not going to happen. On this fateful day, Israel was caught out.
It's interesting, just looking at some of the detail of this. Intelligence assessments at the time believed that Hamas terrorists didn't want a full-scale war and lacked the capability to launch one. IDF officials believed there would be early warnings if an attack was imminent, and the strategy was to maintain the threat rather than to neutralise it. Based on that, officials said soldiers were addicted to the precise intelligence information and failed to challenge the assumptions internally. I mean, there are many people who are anti-Israeli, some of whom who will be watching and listening today, but the IDF is, as you say, is held up as an exemplar of how the military, or how a nation's military is meant to work. If you have one of the best militaries in the world making these kind of mistakes, what does it say about warfare more generally? Sean, are you there? I think we've lost Sean, but I think, I would imagine Sean would probably say that actually it says an awful lot about military more generally. And I think this question about defence funding is a very, very interesting one. When you have one of the best funded, one of the most highly trained, supported by Mossad, supported by Shin Bet, supported by so many different aspects of the administrative structures, and you have the IDF admitting it completely failed with minimum border security on the 7th of October attack. I'm sure that is a very, very difficult thing for so many of those families of those people who were murdered by Hamas terrorists to see. And it'll be interesting to see where the blame really lies in all of that as well. I mean, I've no doubt in my mind that Hamas terrorists are to blame for it, but at the same time, there is some level of certainly culpability, and it is part of, the first duty of government is to defend its people, and the Israeli government failed to do that. And I wonder, also, from Benjamin Netanyahu's perspective, he is under a lot of political pressure. He's under a lot of political pressure internally from his own coalition, but also from many of the hostage families who believe that his response to those attacks, both in the initial day and days, but also now, hasn't been correct. So it's really interesting. Israel is a democracy. Many people have many, many different views, and we will no doubt hear them represented over the next few days on this station. On America, Crystal has been in touch and says, I think a lot of Americans, I include me in this, are in very unknown territory. I've been a Democrat most of my life and have found myself looking at many issues very differently. I voted for Donald Trump. Most Americans are learning and seeing things from new perspective. Many eyes have opened, including to international issues. Trump is the first president not insulting our intelligence, says Crystal. Very, very interesting. We're going to talk about a UK issue in just a minute, and that is the fact that it's to do with driver's licences and the fact that every driver's personal information is now going to be available to the police. Is this something that is this sort of mission creep in regard to the Big Brother? Well, it's the head of research at Big Brother Watch, head of research and investigations, Jake Herford, is going to join us in just a second to debate just that. We'll take your calls, texts and tweets, of course, between now and 7 o'clock. Be sure to get your call in 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss before Kevin takes over at 7. And remember, during Kevin's programme, almost certainly not on time, we will have the press conference between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer at the White House. They're meeting at the moment. They were expecting that press conference a little bit later on. No football tonight, so Kevin is on both radio and on your screen. So however you want to access Talk, you will get that press conference, and no doubt Kevin's ace response to it and his analysis of that with his top guest. That is between 7 and 10 this evening, should say. I'm back tomorrow between 4 and 7 here with Talk Drive, and I'll be back on Saturday and Sunday from 10 with my usual weekend shows as well. Loads to discuss in the next half an hour. Stay with us here on Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, there's been a big change in terms of drivers' personal information. It's going to be made available to the police. That's the proposal from the government anyway, and it's a really interesting one because the Crime and Policing Bill is going to give law enforcement the power to access some 50 million motorist data that is held by the DVLA, the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Agency. Things like motorist names, addresses, date of birth, photographs, endorsements on your licence. I've had a few of those over the years. Convictions, haven't had any of those so far, and relevant medical information that may affect your ability to drive. At present, police can only actually access the data if they're investigating road traffic offences. But this new legislation from the Home Office is going to extend this to all offences to help the investigation of other crimes as well. Let's talk to Jake Herford. He is Head of Research and Investigations at Big Brother Watch. Jake, great to have you on the programme. Some people might say, well, actually, you know, there's so many different crimes that have happened, so many different problems that the police have had, that actually being able to join the dots here in regard to not just motoring offences but other offences as well might actually make sense. Tell us your response to that and also your worries about this.
So the big concern we've got with this is how these powers could be used. This legislation is really vague, and it gives the Home Secretary power to decide what information can go from the DVLA to the police and how it can be used. Now, this is completely a reheated Conservative policy that the previous government tried to bring in. And the last Policing Minister, Chris Philp, was boasting that these photographs wouldn't just be used by the police in terms of investigating individual crimes, but were used as a facial recognition database. So there's a real threat. This access to data could create a 50 million strong facial recognition database for the police. We don't have a national fingerprint database. We don't have a national DNA database. So we don't think innocent people's biometrics should be used in this way. So why should photographs be any different?
What is wrong with a facial recognition database, in your opinion?
It's creating a whole society of suspects. It's treating everyone as a suspect without having anything wrong. We generally accept the police don't have the power to ask us to account for ourselves or check us against a watch list if we're an innocent person. This will completely flip that presumption of innocence on its head. Everyone will be treated as a potential suspect in any investigation where their face was run through this algorithm. And that's why we're really concerned. We're not a paperless police society. We don't have a national ID card. And this would effectively make every single driving licence a quasi-national ID.
But it's interesting, I mean, you're talking about the fact that you could be a suspect, but you could also be very quickly eliminated from inquiries as well. And the police having greater powers in regard to facial recognition might actually help solve many more crimes, especially when, you know, if you're matching CCTV footage, for example. I know and have seen and have concerns certainly about facial recognition because it's not precise, but it's going to get more precise as time goes on.
Well, when you're running 50 million photos of your reference database, that precision is always going to be a problem. Facial recognition precision is a function of how many photographs are on that watch list. And when you've got 50 million photos, the chance that you look like someone else they're looking for is going to be really, really high. So yourself, there's a lot of people in this country, a lot of people driving licenses. There's quite a high chance someone's going to have a face pretty similar to yours who could be looking for. So when you have so many photos, the chance of it being wrong is much, much higher.
Always a worry when Claire Balding or indeed James Corton commit a crime, in my case, it must be said. Just from the perspective of what the Home Office can do you overall feel that the joining up, this idea of joining up different services and facial recognition and different bits of information by itself is a bad point? Because there are, surely you must admit that there are aspects of this that could actually help solve crimes and keep people safer than they are at the moment.
So again, we're really concerned about integration of data. No one signed up to a driving license to expect their data to be given to the police or law enforcement authorities for very low-level crimes.
Really? I mean, surely people would expect that there would be some record somewhere, and if a policeman or woman scans a driving license, surely that information is going to be somewhere, and some would say, well, they have no issue with it being given to the police because they have nothing to hide.
I think the nothing to hide argument is a bit of a spurious one. Everyone has privacy rights, and we accept the limits on the information the police have and what they can do, and this is going to take things the other way. and again, Big Brother, which is a really big concern we have this, is the way this has been enacted. The Home Secretary will have the power to decide what information goes where and how, with very little accountability in Parliament. If they're going to want to do this and create a massive database society, they should put it through Parliament and have that scrutiny there, rather than giving the Home Secretary these powers to do it on a whim with very little parliamentary scrutiny. That's incredibly concerning in a rule of law democracy.
So, accepting, as I expect you do, that this will go ahead, what aspects, I mean, you don't want it to, obviously, that's very clear from what you're saying, but we also live in the real world and Labour has a big majority and so on. What is Big Brother Watch and similar organisations going to, what sort of representations are you going to make to try to improve this legislation and to bring it some way closer to what you would be happier with, Jake?
So the big call we've got is for MPs to amend this legislation to ensure that this database can't be used for facial recognition purposes. That's our big call on what we're pushing for with this.
Okay, I mean, it's interesting, there are people, I just want to read out this message from Karen in Taunton here, who says, I just don't know how people can talk about defence and security in this country, considering how many undocumented and illegal people we have entering our open borders. And that is a real concern, a consistent concern of many viewers and listeners to talk. And I suppose if there was some form of facial recognition, actually you could eliminate people and say, well, you know, that person's in the country legitimately, whereas people who aren't there legitimately can be tracked perhaps in a better way. What would you say to that argument?
I mean, if someone's not documented on a database, they're not going to be in a facial recognition database anyway. The only people who will be on this driving licence database are people who are in this country lawfully and have driving licences. So it isn't going to address that problem at all.
So they shouldn't be suspects. Those people who are here legitimately, they shouldn't be suspects at all, in your opinion. Jake, really interesting to talk to you. I just wonder, just in regard to Big Brother Watch and what you do, I mean, do you think this government is better or worse than the last government in terms of personal liberty, in terms of an erosion of personal liberty that I'm sure you would talk about? And actually, I mean, you're talking about Chris Philp there, who is now the Shadow Home Secretary, who was the policing minister who wanted to do this. Now Labour can do this. Do you think there's any reception or receptiveness to your ideas from this government, better or worse than the last one?
We're finding this government just as difficult as the last in terms of civil liberties, from bank spying powers to mass facial recognition and weakening data protections. This Labour government have reheated conservative policies that are going to impact all our civil liberties and privacy in a very bad way.
Jake, thank you. That's Jake Herford there, who is Head of Research and Investigations at Big Brother Watch. And it's really interesting what Jake is saying there, actually, because anybody who says I've nothing to hide, I always say, right, absolutely fine, give me your phone and what's the number to punch in for the code, and I'll just have a look at, you know, how much money you have in your bank, and, you know, what you've said to your friend on WhatsApp about your boss, and, you know, your internet history and all those kind of things. If people, everybody has secrets, everybody has things they don't want other people to know, and if you say you don't, that is just not the case. Starmer and Trump are together now in the Oval Office. They are having questions thrown to them by the press pack. I'm going to shut up and see if we can hear some of that. We can't actually hear very much from that just at the moment, but on those yellow chairs in the Oval Office near the fireplace there, we have Donald Trump and Keir Starmer, who are live in the Oval Office at the moment, and Donald Trump appears to be leading. Oh, he's been making jokes, and Starmer is there with him. Not quite the same warmth, perhaps, than what Macron had. Less touching. Anyway, let's see if we can hear anything.
Wonderful man, and we appreciate it. I've known him, gotten to know him very well, actually. First term and now second term.
He's praising Keir Starmer. This actually happened a few...
this is a letter from His Majesty the King. It's an invitation for a second state visit. This is really special. This has never happened before. This is unprecedented. And I think that just symbolises the strength of the relationship between us. So this is a very special letter. I think the last state visit was a tremendous success. His Majesty the King wants to make this even better than that. So this is...
Well, that was just some of the footage that's being fed to us. I should clarify that wasn't live, actually. That happened a few moments ago, but it was a conversation between Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, and Donald Trump, the president, and there's a letter there from King Charles inviting Donald Trump for an unprecedented second state visit to the United Kingdom. That will happen in the coming months, and that was something that was largely expected, but Keir Starmer hand delivered that letter in the Oval Office. The two of them were sitting on the chairs by the fireplace there in the Oval Office, and we know that not just the two men themselves, but also many of their senior people like David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, Pete Hesketh, who is the US Defence Secretary, and so on. Various people were in the Oval Office. Often these meetings have many dozens of people in them. It's a large office, and Donald Trump speaking warmly of the King, certainly there, and indeed of Keir Starmer. Interesting, the body language there, just not quite the same touchy-feeliness of Macron and Trump, which happened earlier in the week. Macron was there on Monday, and we know that Zelensky will be there tomorrow. So we'll bring you the very latest on that when we hear more about it, and know, of course, is the press conference coming up a little bit later on. That's going to be part of Kevin O'Sullivan's programme between 7 and 10. We'll take some calls in just a few minutes after the break, including on the the story we've just been talking about there in regard to driver's licences and what you think about that. If you want to use the break to get your call in, the number is 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Earlier this week, after he pleaded guilty to assault, a drunken, repeated, vicious punching of a constituent, his Runcorn constituency, he was sentenced to 10 weeks, but it's been now, after an appeal at Chester Crown Court, suspended for 2 years. He very likely will still face that recall petition, and a by-election is likely to be called, but not a day behind, well, more than a couple of days behind bars for punching someone. Two-tier justice, anybody? God forbid he'd written a hurty tweet to the constituent rather than punched him. He'd probably still be behind bars for 20 years.
Across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
The Reuters news agency are feeding us some more footage of what Starmer and Trump are saying. So let's just see that feed as it comes through. This is not live, but it is what happened in the Oval Office.
Different place, and this is some place that I have investments there. I own Turnberry, I own Aberdeen, and I own a great place called Doonbeg in Ireland. So, you know, I have a great warm spot for your country.
And our trade, obviously, is fair and balanced, and in fact, you've got a bit of a surplus, so we're in a different position there. And obviously, we've contributed hugely in relation to Ukraine, and taken together with Europe, there's about 50%
It'll work,
gone in.
It'll work. It's going to work.
Thank you. So does that mean there won't be any sanctions on the UK then?
We'll have to take a look. I mean, we're going to have a good discussion today, and we have some very talented people on the other side, and we have some people that probably aren't as talented as them, but they're pretty good. Marco, what do you think? Our people are pretty good. And no, we're going to have a good discussion, and we'll be talking about that.
Mr. President, I just wanted to ask, Mr. Stramer, Prime Minister, has said that he believes that Vladimir Putin would be at risk of invading Ukraine again without a sufficient backstop. Do you think that Vladimir Putin would be likely to invade again in the event of a peace deal?
I don't think so. I think when we have a deal, it's going to be the deal. I don't think if I didn't win the election, I don't think we'd be even talking to Putin right now or anybody else. I think it would just, you know, I don't know if you're looking at the stats, but thousands of people are being killed a week, soldiers mostly, because the towns have been destroyed. But thousands of soldiers. This was a very bad week, by the way. I get the stats.
Several numbers.
And you're talking about a human life. Number one, I want to see that, and it doesn't involve American soldiers, but it's Russian and Ukrainian soldiers, and I think I'm speaking for both.
Yeah.
Number one, we want to see that stop, and number two, I want to stop paying the kind of money that we're talking about. You know, we're helping, and we're helping NATO, but we're helping a lot, more than anybody else by far, and I want that to stop also.
Mr. President, the European...
Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. You talked about trade tariffs this morning on your social media site. Just a question about China. 10% tariffs has already been implemented on China. Are you planning to do
an additional 10 above the 10?
This will be an additional 10 above it. And is there, from the talks with Canada and Mexico so far, are you not seeing the progress that you wanted in order to
extend that? I don't see it at all. No, not on drugs. We've done a great job. If you look at Tom Homan, he's been incredible, and Christie, they've done a great job in terms of the border. But the drugs continue to pour into our country, killing hundreds of thousands of people. We're losing substantially more than 100,000 people. I mean, dead. They're dead. The families are destroyed after that happens. So it's, you know, it's not just that. That's the ultimate. But the families are absolutely destroyed. The drugs come in through Mexico. They come, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them come from China. And that's why we did that. It's 10 plus 10. In case, was there confusion on that?
There was, sir, yeah.
Okay, 10 plus 10, it's a second 10. And I think you're going to see, eventually you're going to see drugs stopping, because the country should not be allowing those drugs to come into the United States of America, and we're not going to allow it to happen. So that goes on the 4th of March. And then on the 2nd of April, we have reciprocal tariffs. That's reciprocal, where we charge countries what they're charging us, and nobody should have a problem with that. We have reciprocal. It's reciprocity. It's something that I think everybody I've spoken to said that's fair, and it is. If somebody charges us 25%, we charge them 25. If somebody charges us 10 or 15 or 30 or 70, we charge them an exact like amount, and it's pretty simple, but it's reciprocal tariffs, because the United States has been taken advantage of by many, many different countries, including our friends, friend and foe. And in many cases, our friends took bigger advantage of. When you talk about the EU, we're talking about the EU. The EU has been really very bad to us in terms of trade. And I'm a different kind of a president. I can't let that happen. Thank you. Please, ma'am, go ahead.
Mr. President, what would you be willing to do if Vladimir Putin did not stick to the terms of any deal on Ukraine?
If he not what?
He did not stick to the terms of any deal on Ukraine, because he has a history of not sticking to his word when it comes to international agreements.
I think he'll keep his word. I think I've spoken to him. I've known him for a long time now. You know, we had to go through the Russian hoax together. That was not a good thing. It's not fair. That was a rigged deal, and had nothing to do with Russia. It was a rigged deal with inside the country, and they had to put up with that too. They put up with a lot. It wasn't just us. They had to put up with it, with a phony story that was made up. I've known him for a long time now, and I think he will. I don't believe he's going to violate his word. I don't think he'll be back. When we make a deal, I think the deal's going to hold. Now, they're going to have security. You're going to have security. Yep. You're going to have soldiers. I know France wants to be there. The president has said he wants to have soldiers there. I don't think we're going to even be necessary, but I don't think there'll be any problem with keeping the deal with the security.
We're going to discuss that.
You want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, the deal, if we get it, is going to be hugely important. I don't think it would have happened if the space hadn't been created for it by yourself. But if there's a deal in, we've got to make sure it's a deal that lasts, that is not temporary, that lasts, and that's why we need to make sure that it's secure, and we've lent in and said we'll play our part, and we've talked and we will talk about how we work with yourself, Mr. President, to ensure that this deal is something which is not violated, because it's very important that if there is a deal, we keep it.
And that will be, and I think I can say that will be the easy part. That's the part we look forward to, because putting security there, that's the part we all look forward to. That's easy. The difficult part is getting the deal made. So, but I think we've come a long way. Did you have something?
Yeah, on a personal level.
He's got such a nice face.
Oh.
No, he's smiling. But watch, he'll ask a total killer question. Those are the
I've known him a long time.
They're the ones that get you. No, he looks like a nice guy.
On a personal level, Mr. President, what do you get on most? What's your common ground with Sir Keir Starmer? Because you're both from different political backgrounds.
It's true. I think I can say this because we've known each other now really for a little while. This is not our first meeting, as you know. He loves his country, and so do I. That's our common theme. He loves his country, and I love our country. And we also have two countries that have gotten along for the longest period of time. Right? Number one ally on each side. And we have good. France and Australia, we have a lot of good ones. But we've had a long-time relationship, a long time, hundreds of years. And we like each other, frankly, and we like each other's country, and we love our country. And I think that's our common thread. Okay?
Mr. President, the Europeans...
Yeah, please.
On tariffs, you just said with China...
Who are you with?
I'm with The Independent.
Oh, that's good.
It's on tariffs. You just said with China... Thank you. We charge them. We charge them as in we charge China, but the tariffs are paid eventually by American importers and consumers.
No, they're not. No, I think they're paid for by the country. But, you know, look, we can get into that. I put a lot of tariffs on in my first term, and we made tremendous amounts of progress because of those tariffs. China paid us hundreds of billions of dollars, billions. We never had because they took advantage. And President Xi's a friend of mine, but he knows better than anybody took advantage of our country. He took advantage of presidents that didn't know what they were doing. And they expect them. They actually expect them. The smart countries expect them from me because they know me and they know our country. But they got away with murder for decades, and we just can't let that happen anymore. Behind you, please.
That's very kind, Mr. President. It sounds as though one of you completely trusts President Putin and one of you doesn't trust him an inch. Have I got that right? And why do you trust him?
Look, you know, it's trust and verify. Let's call it that. And I think we both can be that way. You have to verify because you never know what's going to happen. I know a lot of people that you would say no chance that they would ever deceive you, and they're the worst people in the world. I know others that you would guarantee they would deceive you, and you know what? They're 100% honorable. So you never know what you're getting. No, I have confidence that if we make a deal, it's going to hold.
Mr. President, on fentanyl, Mr. President, less than 1% of all fentanyl that comes into the U.S. is apprehended at the Canadian border. So why use fentanyl as a reason
because they should be apprehending much more. They're only apprehending 1%. You're right about that. It's a little more than that. But they should be apprehending much more because a lot comes through Canada. And as Mexico gets stronger in terms of the border, it goes up to Canada. And a lot of drugs are coming in through Canada. We can't have that.
Mr. President.
Yeah, go ahead, please, in the back.
Is there anything you can say tomorrow to President Zelensky to reassure him that his country's war hasn't been in vain and its sovereignty is not going to be threatened by any deal with Russia?
Well, you know, he's coming. Perhaps he's already on his way. And we're going to be signing the deal together, probably in front of the media. And we're going to be having a good conversation. No, we want to work with him, President Zelensky, she said before. We want to work with him, and we will work with him. I think the president and I actually have had a very good relationship. It maybe got a little bit testy because we wanted to have a little bit of what the European nations had. You know, they get their money back by giving money. We don't get the money back. Biden made a deal. He put in $350 billion. And I thought it was a very unfair situation.
We're not getting all of ours. I mean, quite a bit of ours was gifted. It was given. There were some lends, but mainly it was gifted, actually.
Mr. President, the Europeans want Ukraine to be part of NATO as part of this deal. Are you willing to budge on that at all, or is it a firm?
Well, I could be very nice and say, oh, well, we'll work to it. Look, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. That's what started this whole thing. Biden said that, and all of a sudden the gun started. That was one of the primary reasons this started. And this was long before President Putin. They never said it was an impossibility. So we can say, oh, gee, well, we'll try. But that's something that's just not going to happen. And then the other question I ask is about the land. Will you get your land back? Well, they've fought long and hard on the land, and you and I will be discussing that. And we're going to certainly try and get as much as we can back. But on the NATO, it's just not, that's not going to happen. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, you talked about having common ground with Keir Starmer, but there are things you disagree on as well. You described Zelensky as a dictator. He describes President Putin as a dictator. Do you see that as a problem?
The relationship between President Zelensky and President Putin is not a good one. You've noticed, right? It's not a good one. It's not a good relationship. And we're going to have to try and work something out. Sometimes that happens. I get along with both. I have a very good relationship with President Putin. I think I have a very good relationship with President Zelensky. And now we're doing the deal, and we're going to be in there. We're going to be actually in there, digging our hearts out. And hopefully, we need the rare earth, and we have some here, but we don't have enough. Our economy is very strong, and we need a lot of things that, in some cases, we don't have here. So I think we're going to have a very good relationship, but the relationship between them is not the best.
Mr. President, do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
Sir, will you be discussing orchestra?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yeah,
sir.
George Parker from the Financial Times. Can you see any situation where US forces could be deployed as a backstop in a peacekeeping operation in direct confrontation with Russian forces?
Well, there is a backstop thing. First you're going to have European countries because they're right there. We're very far away. We have an ocean between us. But we want to make sure it works. So I don't know, when you say backstop, you mean a backstop psychologically or militarily or what? But we are a backstop because we'll be over there. We'll be working in the country. We're going to be, that's a great thing economically for them because, when